למה את עושה לי דמעות? לא חושבת עליי, תמיד עושה לי מנגינות. ומה יהיה עלינו? את הורסת, באתי לבנות. את לא שואלת מתי, ואת יפה לי בלילות. ומי יפריד בינינו ככה? את אומרת לי פשוט, תתחיל לנגן, בקצב תיתן, ומה שיהיה פה יהיה. שיהיה לנו שבוע טוב, שבוע טוב, מן אביב ומזכור לטוב, שבוע טוב, איך אני אוהב שאת רוקדת. למה את גונבת צמיחות? נהיה לי קר פה מדי, תשאלי בחלומות מה יהיה עלינו, גם בעצב גם בשמחות. את לא עוזבת את היד, נכון עשינו טעויות, ומי יכול עלינו ככה? את אומרת לי פשוט, תתחיל לנגן, בקצב תיתן, ומה שיהיה פה יהיה. שיהיה לנו שבוע טוב, שבוע טוב, מן אביב ומזכור לטוב, שבוע טוב, איך אני אוהב שאת אומרת. שיהיה לנו שבוע טוב, שבוע טוב, כל מה שנשאר זה לאהוב, שבוע טוב, איך אני אוהב שאת רוקדת. הלאה. שבוע טוב.
יום ליום, שבוע לשבוע, לא צריך הרבה בשביל להיות, רק לשמור דבר אחד שלא יחלוף ברוח, וכמה זה פשוט לאהוב. בכל יום לומד איתך ללכת, בכל יום לומד איתך ליפול, אבל ככה זה טוב, לאורך כל הדרך, יחד קרוב. את אוהבת, אם את מחכה לי שם בסוף היום, עד שאחזור להיכנס בדלת, את כל מה שרציתי לחיות, ככה מיום ליום, ככה זה עובר לנו עדיין, אוחזים ידיים כל יום, את איתי אני בקפה קורא לך בדמעות, מה שיש בינינו זה הכל, אבל עדיין לחלום איתך את כל מה שיכולנו להיות. בכל יום לומד איתך לשמוח, בכל יום לומד איתך לבכות, אבל ככה זה טוב, לאורך כל הדרך, יחד קרוב. כל היום דואג אם את אוהבת, מחכה לי שם בסוף היום, עד שאחזור להיכנס בדלת, את כל מה שרציתי לחיות, ככה
really ain't stepping in nothing. See me in the Fed posted, that's the end of discussion. Whatever you threaten is funny. Me in the Fed, always see us in person, you running. We've been through it, we've been through it, we've been through it, been through a lot. Persecution, persecution, persecution still can't be stopped. We see through it, we see through it, we see through the enemy's plot. We ain't losing, we ain't losing, we ain't losing to no more ops. Pull up on the scene, track suit go bling. The uniform for my team, quick trip up the road to Queens. אם כמה גרוזינים, אם כמה בוכרים, כמה סורים וגם קפקזים. כל הגנג שלי בניו יורק, שילוב רוסי מזרחי. Them ones that you don't wanna mess with, nothing but refugees, descendants. If we really want it, we can get hectic. Best to slide if you're signing a death wish. Anywhere outside the homeland, we've been the smallest minority. Taking it into our own hands, born with distrust for authority. We've been through it, been through a lot. Persecution, persecution, persecution still can't be stopped. We see through it, we see through it, we see through the enemy's plot. We ain't losing, we ain't losing, we ain't losing to no more ops. Baby, welcome to the party. Pops came from Moscow and went to Canarsie. Barely had nothing in the pocket. Stopped a couple times before they docked at the airport in Jamaica, Queens. A couple broke refugees with 2 kids and some hand-me-down jeans. Furniture come from the side of the street. Lord knows if it's clean, but it's clean enough for the projects. Still have better prospects than staying stuck in a mosh pit of politicians and persecution. Dictators with the taste for shooting anyone who stands out from the movement, including the Jews of the Soviet Union. Been through the harshest of winters, targeted, carted off into the wilderness, labeled political prisoners. So tell me again to acknowledge your privileges. My squad can't be compared to. I'm rolling around with some bare Jews. Done looked at death in the eye and still survive. Think twice when you stare, fool. We really ain't stepping in nothing. See me in the Fed posted, that's the end of discussion.
Hello, my name is Pearl Gasner, and I'm the high school advisor with Hasbara Fellowships Canada. Before we begin our program, Hasbara Fellowships would like to take a moment to acknowledge the tragic events that are currently taking place in Ukraine. Our thoughts and prayers are with our Jewish brothers and sisters there, as well as all of the people of Ukraine whose lives are at risk. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Israel Engage Winter 2022. This virtual summit will be led entirely by our Hasbara student leaders who are advocating for Israel and the Jewish people on high school, college, and university campuses from across Canada and the United States. My name is Daniel Corin. I am the Executive Director of Hasbara Fellowships Canada, and I am thrilled to be your host for today's virtual summit. I would like to thank all of you for being here and thank our Hasbara Canada and Hasbara US boards, our supporters, our stakeholders, staff, alumni, and of course, our amazing students. None of this would be possible without our incredible supporters and stakeholders. So please consider making a donation today at www.israelengage.org. We established Israel Engage as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic when traveling was near impossible. And for a short period, we couldn't bring our students to Israel for our incredible advocacy training programs. But our students were still very hungry for the skills and resources to combat anti-Semitism on their respective campuses, to advocate for Israel coexistence and peace, and to empower their fellow students by educating them that Israel and Zionism are fundamental aspects of our Jewish identity. In an increasingly virtual world where anti-Semitism and anti-Israel hatred are not only promulgated by a fringe minority, but by organizations such as Amnesty International, and misinformation about Judaism is spread by celebrities such as Emma Watson and Whoopi Goldberg, Israel Engage gives us a way to inspire our students by letting them lead the show. With Israel Engage, it is our students, the proud Zionists that they are, who converse and learn from high-level speakers, who come up with questions about how to proactively educate those around them and how to counter the anti-Semitic myths that are unfortunately all too common on campus and online. Our past Israel Engage summits have featured speakers such as Noah Tishby, Brett Stevens, Rudy Rockman, Emily Schrader, and Yosef Haddad, to name a few. And today we will continue with the highest quality programming you can find in the Israel Advocacy Campus space. Today we will have speakers and students from across the globe uniting and learning from one another. Firstly, The New School of Israel Advocates with Isabella Hazan, Noah Westside Gravy Shufutinsky, Jordan Tilchin, and Amy Albertson. Noah and Isabella are both proud Hasbara alumni and are powerhouses online. Noah is the most talented Jewish rapper in the game, even more than Drake, I would say, who actually recorded the video for his smash hit Diaspora on our Hasbara Israel trip. Isabella, meanwhile, is the founder of a Jewish empowerment movement and apparel brand, Decolonized Judean. You'll notice I'm sporting one of her sweaters today, which she gifted to me as the proud Hasbara alumna that she is. Isabella is one of the most passionate voices explaining why Jews are an indigenous people today. Jordan Tilchin is literally the funniest person I follow on social media, who has been able to make light of the harsh anti-Israel and the anti-Zionist sentiment that we see online by transforming it into Jewish humor. I highly suggest you follow her on Twitter especially. Then we have Amy Albertson, a proud Chinese-American Jew who has been able to educate and inspire thousands of people on why Jews are not white and why we do not conform to the modern definition of race. Jews are a people. End of tweet. We will also offer sessions on the emergence of Arab Zionism with 3 proud Arab advocates for Israel and coexistence, as well as a session with Fleur Hassan Nahum, the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. I will now pass the digital mic to our Hasbara fellow Sadie Hilf, who will be moderating our first panel. Take it away, Sadie.
So thank you, Daniel, for that great introduction. My name is Sadie Hilf, and I am the Hasbara Fellow at Grove City College, and I am super proud and excited to moderate this panel today, the New School of Israel Advocates, with this phenomenal group of activists. So let's just get straight to the questions then. So firstly, I think our audience would be interested in how you all came to be advocates for Israel and for the Jewish people. If you guys could try to kind of keep the answers to 2 minutes, I can let you know when that time is coming up. So Amy, let's start with you.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me here with everyone. My story actually starts on campus, probably like a lot of the fellows. And I was at an Israel event and it was protested. This was the first time we had an Israel event at my school. And this was many, many years ago. We won't say how many. The event was protested, and at the time, my Hillel did not want to touch Israel. They said, we're the Jewish group, we're not the Israel group. And for me, that was not enough. So I started an Israel group. And from there, in grassroots activism, I went into the realm of social media. And that's kind of how I ended up where I am now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Isabella, you're up next.
Yeah, so I've always been involved in Jewish life and out of a place of love. I've been, like, when I was a kid, I used to create volunteer programs and IDF drives and all these kinds of things. And then as I started getting older, especially during the 2014 Tzuk Eitan war between Gaza and Israel, I saw just how much hate there was online and how there was truly an ideological war waged against our people. So I decided to invest more of my efforts on combating this, and that's how I guess I got started online a little bit. But I've always been involved from a place of love because I've always connected to it. I went to a Jewish school, had my bat mitzvah on Masada, and I guess I was always just involved. But I would say 2014 is what's made me really take my activism the next level.
That's awesome. Jordan?
Yeah, so I think I started getting like a lot more vocal at the beginning of the pandemic. It was a total accident. I started feeling a noticeable difference and a rise in anti-Semitism around me, particularly just like stories coming out of New York, or even I'm a celebrity news editor. So even in the celebrity world, I noticed like more celebrities saying really like problematic things. And I was wondering, I started to like notice, like, why is nobody really talking about this? And then on the other hand, why does nobody really seem to understand this? And then so I started talking about it more and more on my social media. And that's when I started realizing what sort of disconnect there was between, you know, Jewish education and anti-Semitism. And so, yeah, I haven't stopped talking about it since.
great. And Noah.
Yeah, so I grew up in a very strong Zionist household, being Black and Russian Jewish. So understanding the importance of having a homeland because of the Black diaspora experience and the Soviet diaspora experience. So for me, that's always something that was just a given, was a part of my Jewish identity. And then I think as I, also made music from a young age, I always rapped about things that were important to me. Never shied away from talking about my Judaism the same way as I never shied away from talking about other aspects of my identity. But then I think as I went into college and started taking time to independently sort of think about what my Jewish identity would be like as like a fully independent adult, and getting to travel to Israel actually for the first time in university, that just became a bigger part of who I was. And I started to reflect that a little bit more in my music and anything that I put out into the public. And then getting just more involved in like student organizations related to Zionism, related to Israel on campus, being able to actually go on like the Hasbara Fellowships program and record the diaspora music video while I was on there, I think definitely helped me strengthen the amount of like Israel and Israeli culture that was reflected in my public persona.
Thank you so much for answering. Those experiences were kind of awesome to hear and reflect on how similar they are to a lot of people that I've met on my Hasbara Fellowship experience. So this panel is called the New School of Israel Advocates. How would any of you say that how you advocate is different than how past generations have done? So anyone is free to answer, but yeah.
So as I said, I started off by reacting to a negative event. And for a long time, that's how my advocacy kind of took shape. It was a lot of reaction to anti-Semitism and reaction to anti-Zionism, which if you ask me is anti-Semitism. But I think that something that I've learned over the time is, and now that I really try to push in my messaging, is that we have to also be more positive with our advocacy. It's not only this reaction, and we need to proactively put out positive things about how we love being Jewish, how Jewish life, Jewish diversity, Jewish community, all of these things are beautiful and bring us a lot of joy. And that does two things. I think it really strengthens our own Jewish identities versus feeling like it's burdensome when we're just reacting to the constant stream of anti-Semitism. And the other thing is other people are more susceptible to our messaging when we are calling out anti-Semitism, when we are there asking them for help to stand up to it, because they're not only seeing us constantly react to something negative, which can make them kind of ask a question, why do I only hear about Jewish people when it's something negative? And I think that's something I'm seeing with, all the people sitting here with me. I see that every day, that switch, even though a lot of us did come from somewhere reactionary, like no shame on anyone who does. I came from the exact same place. I just think that switch to being more proactive and positive is something I'm seeing in the community, and I really love it.
I love
I
how
agree.
positive your content is.
Thank you.
Yeah, go Jordan.
No, I agree exactly with what Amy was saying. My first several months of doing this was very reactionary, very emotional, angry, upset, draining. And I started to see the benefits of lifting up the Jewish community more, trying to make other Jewish people feel really proud of our history and our culture. Because if you just focus on the negativity all the time, it's so draining. I wouldn't still be doing it. There's no possible way to, if that's all you're focusing on.
Okay, so I'll go to your question was how are we the new school of Jewish advocates? I think we all do this post positive. We're not headline activists where we just respond to headlines. But one thing that I would say I do is, and I think most of us do, is there's a fundamental mistake that was made in Israel and Jewish education. And that is when we talk about Zionism, we talk about Israel being a safe haven for the Jewish people. Yes, Israel is a safe haven for the Jewish people, but that's not why we have Israel. If that were the case, we could have any other place in the world. And I think the most critical and the greatest mistake that is made in Israel education is when we talk about our right to our homeland, our indigenous land, our identity, when it's rooted in fear. It's a weak sense of identity, and it's also inaccurate. So that is the greatest flaw, in my opinion, in Israel education that has been done in the past. And that's something that I seek to correct this generation, that we are not out of fear. We have a right to our land because we're from this land. Our culture revolves around this land, our language, our belief system, everything is the land that we're from. And then the second way I think that I differ also, but definitely I see you guys all do this too, is we make difficult content digestible and easy to understand. And I think that's a way that we've changed and picked up the torch and like we're going to pass it down and all that. I think it's by making all this like difficult content about Israel, the Middle East, wars, so many things that are dense, easy and fun to understand, and also often funny. With everyone here, I love like watching your stuff online. Amy, you're positive. Jordan, you're funny. Noah, you're just so good with words. Like everyone has their thing, and I think we all make this dense content so interesting and easy to understand to both a Jewish and non-Jewish audience. So those are the two things I think for me.
I think I really agree with Amy, what you were saying about making sure that we're not just being reactive. And obviously like recognizing that many of us started from that place. And Jordan, you also talked about this in the progression of like showing that journey to anyone who's following so everyone can kind of get like inspiration from that. And then Isabella, what you're saying about making the content digestible. I think that's also where my perspective comes in from the music. I think I grew up in an environment where like Israel was a given. It was part of my identity. The reason why, like a short story about my dad's side of the family from the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had a nationalities policy where they divided up different ethnic groups into different nationalities that would fall under like Soviet citizenship and identity, and each of those nationalities would have like a respective homeland within the Soviet Union. That wasn't necessarily always accurate and didn't really work out because there's a lot of discrimination, but that's a different story. But that didn't apply to Jews because Israel, the homeland of the Jewish people, is not in where the Soviet Union was. So it's always apparent, like Israel obviously was like a physical lifeline to so many Jewish communities. And a safe haven, but it was also like an ideological lifeline. That's the thing that kept a lot of Jewish communities, like the one that my dad comes from, that were not able to practice their religion connected to their culture. So for me, that was always like a given that Israel is something that I'm proactive about and I'm connected to, whether it's talking about a headline or responding to anti-Semitism or just in the traditions that I'm able to practice now. But I think that there is like that problem as far as like that's not normal to say in a lot of modern like environments. So when I went to university, there are all these conversations about anti-normalization. We don't normalize with Zionists. And I witnessed before my eyes in the 4 years I was at university, certain organizations that in my freshman year, first year student, we could partner with as GW for Israel, different political groups. And by the end, would refuse to partner with us. And I think part of that is because the only time that those groups, first of all, they're anti-Semitic. Second of all, the only time they ever heard about Jews was with controversy. And if that's controversy they didn't want to be related to, they would step away from us. And I think for us as Jewish people, it's important to normalize our own culture. So like musically, I like to talk about certain more heavy topics related to the Jewish community. But other times, like I like to make songs that are just reflective of the Jewish community that I see. And I think that's something that you witness when you come to Israel, is that people really are living their Judaism. Today, like when I'm greeting people, it's Shavua Tov. It's something that's inherently tied to our tradition. And it's not even necessarily something that people are doing consciously thinking about responding to anti-Semitism. But I think we need to bring that culture and that environment that allows young Jews to experience their identity, not in a reactive way, to the United States more.
Thank you so much for all of your answers. They were really awesome. So Isabella, this is a question for you in particular. What would you say that peace looks like to you in this situation? And how can we strive to find peace when there are so many people on all sides that are actively fighting against peace and a peace process?
So peace on the land is up to the people from that land and of that land. So I think first and foremost, peace has to do with us acknowledging each other's suffering. And we can talk about so many different peace plans, whether it's a federation plan, a 2-state solution, a 3-state solution. I've even heard of a 6-state solution. But first and foremost, I think that peace looks like what we envision peace looking like, where a Palestinian can go live in Tel Aviv and a Jew can go live in Shechem, or in the places that are essential to our culture, the cradle of Jewish civilization. I don't think that peace involves us giving up an inherent part of who we are. So I think first and foremost, peace starts with those on the ground having conversations, and most importantly, erasing that polarization and that hate. The PA's textbooks are riddled with anti-Semitism. Hamas's textbooks are awful. They show images of the Holocaust and they say that it is their tragedy. There is so much to do and to unlearn before we could have peace. But I think that we are unlinking the chain, and a step towards peace is, first of all, normalizing each other and identity, not belittling our claims to the land, not being a part of, not being another link in the chain that incites hate, really trying to bridge that gap. And that even starts with Jews and Palestinians in the diaspora. I find it easier to speak to a Palestinian on the land than in the diaspora. And a lot of people find that interesting, but I know that I see like everyone's nodding their head. I know that Jews on campus definitely feel that. You know, when I went to Tel Aviv University, I had a bunch of Palestinian friends. The lady who did my eyebrows was Palestinian, and my hairdresser is Palestinian in Israel. It's normal. It's that regular everyday interaction. And I think that Palestinians and Jews in the diaspora have a role to play, and that is bridging that gap and stopping the anti-normalization policies. And the second thing to bring about peace, because it's, you know, it comes in stages, is that Jews and Palestinians, we continuously talk to the world. We're not talking to each other. We're lobbying everybody, and we're not speaking to each other. And that would be how I see myself bringing about peace in the diaspora and hopefully encouraging conversations on the land.
Thank you so much for talking about that. Now, Jordan, we have a question for you. So your style of advocacy tends to be rooted in comedy, and your posts, when you respond to anti-Israel posts, are very funny. My personal favorite has been the Zionist Dolphin saga. So where do you get your inspiration, and do you find that comedy is an effective tool in this area?
Yeah, so actually, it took a while of me being in this space to realize that when you're on Twitter and you see, you can search the word Zionist, you can search the word Jew, you can search the word Israel. And when you look at the tweets, they are overwhelmingly not positive, and they are overwhelmingly ignorant. And so when you scroll through them, there has to be some sort of, to me, education is so important, but there's also a moment where you have to realize that some people just don't want to be educated. And they'll post something really like conspiratorial, so clearly not true, like funny on its own, but then, you know, it sparks inspiration within me. Let me see what I can do with this. Let me turn this into, you know, Pesach at my grandma's house or something, or the Zionist dolphins, like you were saying, you know, in Gaza. So I think like in situations where you just know that these are cases where you could probably highlight the silliness of the tweet better by making a joke out of it than actually giving it, you know, presenting it in any other sort of way. Like some things just are so ridiculous, they don't even need to be debunked. Turn it into a joke. But then again, you need to know where that line is, certainly, because obviously education would be my first choice. So I had to sort of figure that out.
Awesome, thank you so much. Noah, this next question is for you. So rap and hip hop appeal to very broad audiences, but the subject matter of a lot of your music is very focused on Judaism and Zionism. Would you say you've been able to engage a lot of non-Jews on the subject matter who love rap and are listening to your music, and been able to educate them about it?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So yeah, I think that one of the benefits of hip hop is the fact that a lot of people who are really just into the genre like it for like the artistic, you know, qualities that it has when it comes to like flow and beats and like the different rhythms you could find in it. So I think it's like a really powerful tool to really tell people's story. And a lot of, you know, original hip hop had to do with content that most people in the United States of America, even before it spread globally, could not relate to. And then a couple years down the road, you had people from New York listening to rappers from Compton talking about a completely different lifestyle, but still being able to understand and empathize. So I think I've seen something a little bit similar, you know, because I do rap about a lot of different things, and definitely am unapologetic about the Jewish aspects of it. So, you know, I have a lot of people who started following me because they like some just kind of San Diego tracks that I have about, you know, growing up in San Diego, the fire Mexican food and lowriders. And then, you know, they get to hear a little bit more of my, you know, personal story that includes all of the things that I just mentioned, but it also includes having this connection to Israel and a little bit about my culture. So I think within, the core group of people who are actually like fans of hip hop, I've had a lot of people, reach out and be like, yo, it's dope to hear that, you're representing your culture and you're telling your story and you're being authentic. And for them, it's not even necessarily like a political thing. It's just, here's this person telling their story in this art form that we all love.
So I know a lot of my non-Jewish friends have listened to your music and have really engaged with it and have educated themselves a lot. Just having listened to your lyrics, I had a friend Google the Farhud sitting in my car. She's like, I've never heard of that before. And then we had a whole little history lesson. But thank you. So Amy, this one's for you. So you used to be known as That Asian Israeli. Have you faced any unique obstacles in Zionist and Jewish circles due to your heritage being both Jewish and Chinese?
Yes, in short, yes. But I think as much as the Jewish community can be so welcoming and so amazing, and I definitely love it, and anything that I say next is definitely out of love to want to improve, is there is a lot of internal, for lack of a better term, racism and delegitimization of not just Jews of different hues, we could say, because there's another term that I won't use that can be triggering for people. But there's not only that internal racism, but things like I'm a patrilineal Jew, something I'm very vocal about. And I've had people come tell me that I'm not really Jewish. And what really gets me about that is that they will uplift me and praise me for my advocacy for the Jewish people. And then they will turn around when I start to post about being open to different types of Jews and tell me, well, honey, you're not really Jewish. And to me, that's like the audacity that you will lift me up when I'm doing something that serves you. And then because of your difference in opinion or practice or whatever, that you're going to go tell me that I'm not really Jewish. As far as in Asian circles, I'd say, to be fair, I'm much more embedded and active in Jewish activism and Jewish circles. But something that I've seen is in response to when I talk about anti-Asian racism, which has simultaneously been rising over the time of the pandemic, we've seen with anti-Semitism, is that general non-Jewish or non-Jewish adjacent audiences are so quick to speak about it, so quick to be like, yes, that's right, we need to talk about this, this is terrible, like, I'll stand up for you. When I talk about anti-Semitism, there's a lot of crickets, and not the good luck kind, the kind that are silent. And so I would say these are kind of the main differences or experiences that I've had through different communities. But they don't stop me. They're things that kind of make me just push more to try to talk about those things. And I know that like these people that are in the room are with me, so I don't let it stop me.
Thank you so much for talking about that. And I hope we can all heed your warning and work to do better.
Thank you.
So this is kind of for Noah and Isabella. So I know you're both Hasbara alumni and have served as Hasbara fellows on your respective campuses. Would you say that helped your current path?
Yeah, I think it absolutely did help. First and foremost, like I filmed a video for Diaspora, like on Hasbara Fellowship, so that's a given. But on top of that, going back to campus, that was like the first opportunity I had to hear such a wide range of perspectives from people here actually in the land, kind of going off of what Isabella was talking about how peace and the solution is going to come from people here. Arabs, Jews, Muslims, Christians, Druzim, everyone here, like they're the ones who are going to have a role in what the future is going to look like and what coexistence is going to look like. And Hasbara Fellowships gave me the opportunity to actually talk to people and understand the nuances and the complications on the ground, and also understand that I don't even have all the answers, and that's okay to say. But it's still important to respect human experiences and to bring that back to campus. So I think being able to come back to campus with that perspective and also host events and use those types of resources to have those conversations with my peers absolutely helped me on the path that I'm on.
Just to add to that, it definitely helped me. And as Noah said, it added that perspective, but also that credibility. So when you're back on campus or outside of campus, you've been to Area A, you've been to Rawabi, you've been on the border of Gaza, of Lebanon. We've met so many different kinds of people on the land, and so many different experiences and opinions. Those who are pro-Israel, anti-Israel, and it doesn't even boil down to pro or anti when you're on the land. It's so much more nuanced, and it's so much more real and authentic. So it was an amazing experience meeting so many people and really being in areas that you can't really go without a trip, where it's not as you have to go with, like in Area A, it's very difficult to go as a Jew to Area A of Judea, Samaria, the West Bank. So it definitely gives us that perspective, and that credibility definitely helped me and opened my eyes too as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking about that. So a question for all of you now. So it seems like so many of us have political disagreements, and that those can get in the way when we're trying to advance the common goal of Zionism and peace and coexistence. What do you guys think is the best way to help put those disagreements aside and work toward progress together?
So I'm the only Canadian here, so I think I'll go for it first to see you guys. In Canada, it's not as politicized. So for me, what I think is most important, and that's why I founded Decolonized Judean, is viewing our Jewish identity and who we are from a Jewish perspective, and not adopting the views or our culture or merging anything that we are from the non-Jewish world. So I think that politics aside, we all have a common goal, and that goal is to bring about Jewish identity, bring the Jewish story to consciousness. Decolonized Judean is about shifting culture and bringing the Jewish story in pop culture, and showing that we could be Jewish and proud and making it cool. So I think that politics aside, I don't think politics should even be relevant. We all have the same goal: combating anti-Semitism and being proud to be Jewish. And yeah, so what? Some Jewish advocates can be conservative or liberal. I'm Canadian, not as involved in American politics, but I see it online, and I think that it's true that we have a common goal, and we should unite over our shared values, belief system, and love for the land, and that it shouldn't be so relevant, because if we're fighting for the Jewish rights based on the left or on the right, it's temporary. Presidents change. The Jewish people are eternal, and so is their love for our land. So I think we should root ourselves in something that's much deeper.
If I can add on to that, as an American, like Isabella said, it is very polarized in America. I think most things in America end up in a binary. And I think very similar to what she said, it's coming back to like your Jewish perspective and remembering that anti-Semitism transcends left and right lines, and anti-Semitism on the left or the right is not better or worse. It looks different, but at the end of the day, I know a lot of people here have talked about the horseshoe theory, and I learned that from fellow advocates and activists. And I think it's really important to take a step back from whatever your politics are. Like, fine, you're in America and you exist in probably one of these camps. I'm also guilty of that, although being in Israel really showed me kind of how to float between different things, because it's very different politically there. But as I was saying, it's just remember that anti-Semitism and being Jewish doesn't fit in one or the other, and you have to navigate the world from that perspective, because it doesn't matter if you go to the left or you go to the right. Someone is going to alienate you, probably with anti-Semitism, and you just have to be ready for that and remember that we have a common goal, which is fighting anti-Semitism and fighting anti-Zionism, and all of that is the same on both sides.
And to add on to that, also just reiterating the importance of, I think, putting your people over your politics. And I think it's really important that we don't cherry pick which anti-Semitism is worse than another example of anti-Semitism, just because, somebody, a Jewish person might identify on the left, and an anti-Semitic instance happened on the left. They can't just, call it out when it happens on the right and not, with their own party. So obviously, like they were saying, like when you're an American citizen, you often find yourself in one of these two camps. But it's really important to sort of like peel back the layers, realize your environment, sort of understand, that anti-Semitism, like Amy was saying, comes from everywhere, and we have to call it out no matter where it rears its ugly head.
Yeah, I think it's really important also to view it from like a Jewish perspective, as Isabella was saying. And for me, I think about it in the way that the Jewish nation predates the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or the Green Party. And that's important to remember. And I think it goes two ways. Like one is being able to sit back and recognize even if someone has political disagreements with you in regards to diaspora politics or Israeli politics, that you shouldn't necessarily let that get in the way of you viewing them as a member of your people. And also, like personally, being able to check that your own political views are not inhibiting you from reaching out to other people, and that you know your Judaism is a core part of who you are before your political identity. And I'll send like a little shot. This might be a hot take, but there's like a little controversy last week because like Democratic Socialists of America was putting together some panel about like what different religions have to offer, you know, the left or socialism or something kind of weird frame. And Jews were excluded from that. And there's some uproar like, oh, like, why are Jews being excluded from this? Personally, I'm happy about that because I don't view my Jewish identity. First of all, I don't think it's compatible with like democratic socialism at large. Judaism is an ancient tradition that predates any of the like newer topics. So I don't agree with putting it in that box. But on top of that, I don't view my religious and ethnic identity as a tool to offer a modern political movement. And I think it's important for a lot of Jewish people to get into that mindset and to remember that we were who we are as a people before these modern constructions, and still to be involved wherever we are and hold tight in our beliefs, but also recognize that our culture is older than that.
I love that. No, it's like not morphing ourselves into whatever is popular at the time. And I have one more, like, just made me think of an example. For those of you, like, you probably saw the Freedom Convoy here in Canada. What's happening? That's very controversial, especially in law school. Like, you cannot bring it up. It's like one of the only things where I think is polarized in Canada now for the first time. So we have something interesting. Okay. And an example that I want to give about this is that they often they're trying to make Holocaust comparisons, or they'll say Trudeau is speaking like you know who, and stuff like that. And obviously, Jewish people who are for this movement are making excuses for it, or I'll see people try to use the suffering of Jewish people in order to advance this political agenda. And this is a really clear-cut example of how politics get involved with, your activism. So I made a post saying, like, if you do not talk about Holocaust Remembrance Day, which was 3 days ago, but you're using the suffering of our people to advance your agenda, keep our name out of your mouth. Do not talk about it. And if you did not call out the Hamas flags this May in downtown Montreal, but you're calling out the Nazi flag at the protest, well, keep us out of your mouth. You clearly only care about Jewish suffering when it's convenient for you. And I think that's a good example of how we see anti-Semitism that matters on one side, or doesn't matter, how it's just politically convenient. And I love what you said, Jordan, people over politics. Like, I like that. I'm gonna copy that. I'm kidding, I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you all for weighing in on that. It's a challenging subject that a lot of people have to deal with now. So last question from me. So what advice would you have to all the students who are watching right now, and also want to hope to dispel the disinformation that's found on the internet about Israel and Zionism?
Okay, so I'll go. I'll give an example about combating misinformation. I worked with Honest Reporting for a bit, and I'm really into media relations and how the media works right now. There's this really great book by Shoshana Zuboff, which is called The Surveillance Capitalism, and it talks just about, kind of touched on that topic. So what I would say is, when I was on campus at Marianopolis, I started a group called Hebrews for Humanity. It's all about Tikkun Olam, and it's from a non-Jewish, that's my little brother. He's not so little. Sorry. Yeah, he's like 16. He eats his vegetables. Anyways, so at Marianopolis, I started a group called Humans for Humanity, all about Tikkun Olam, and it wasn't just for Jews; it was for people of all backgrounds. And we came together to do activism, social justice. Like, we would like support a lot of social justice causes, and like it was a space for Zionists to feel safe and be in progressive circles. And I had posted when there was incendiary balloons coming from Hamas to Israeli territory, trying to lure children. I had posted against this. I had posted on our page. And a lot of my board members were saying, "Oh, you can't post that. Like, Hamas is not, like, it's not so bad. We don't know. Like, it's political." And I was 17, I was very upset. I was very hurt. I took it very personally. I said, what? How could they not care that young Israelis, young Jews would be hurt by these incendiary balloons? I was furious, and I was also very sad. I thought, wow, they must be anti-Semitic. They must hate all Jews. Like, how could they not care? And with time, I learned that my messaging was a problem. And that is too abrupt. And now my executives want to go to Israel. They have Save a Child's Heart stickers on their laptop. They rock Decolonized Judean. So from going to that to wearing Decolonized Judean, that's a big deal. And clearly they're not anti-Semitic. There was a gap in the knowledge. And we see that if we weren't Jewish, we wouldn't really know what was happening on the ground. We would just see this inflammatory misinformation in media. So what I would say is, like, don't right away think that someone's anti-Semitic. Show them. And show them in a way that sometimes maybe not posting something so abruptly, talking about it first. What is Hamas? What's happening on the ground? Is it a war? Is it not? So that's one example of, I would say, how to combat the misinformation is give it a chance. You know, it might not always work, but you're planting a seed, and in the long run, it will have an impact. Trust me.
I can chime in on that. I think other than positivity and, you know, being more empowered as a Jewish person, knowledge is really empowering. So it's not that you need to become an expert or something, but read books and keep up with the news and just kind of know what's going on, because trust me, when you end up in one of those situations, you will feel much more empowered to speak up about it when you are a bit knowledgeable. And it is complicated. So on the other side of that is like not feeling the pressure to know all of the ins and outs of everything. And the other thing I would say is, as I've said before, is like share the positive things about being Jewish as much as you combat anti-Semitism, not only for the optics, but for yourself, because trust me, like as Jordan said earlier, and I know everyone here like has experienced this, is like it will feel much different, and you will definitely experience something different internally when you are being outwardly proud and talking about being Jewish and then reacting also to all the negativity.
I agree with Amy. It's like knowledge is power, and, you know, reading as much as you can and diversifying your feed with like a bunch of different like Jewish minds and their thoughts and how they distill their feelings about everything just makes you, like, after a while of seeing other activists do that, I had felt so much like fire within me to start talking about it myself. And also just like taking that step, even if it's just like reposting like one sentence of a distilled thought, you're really sort of breaking through to like your non-Jewish followers to be like, hey, actually, like, you're kind of making them think back to like a time where like maybe they didn't even realize like that they were making the environment feel like uncomfortable or unsafe for you. And you're breaking through and just being like, hey, actually, like Israel does mean a lot to me. So-and-so traditions do mean a lot to me. And like that joke you made was kind of inappropriate. Like it'll start to make other people like really think about other people who follow you, non-Jewish friends, think about like maybe like things they said, and then maybe they'll be like, oh, that I need to start like reframing the way I think a little bit. So even just like taking that step is huge.
Yeah, I think it's really important to, as much as you can, like integrate Israel, your connection to Israel, into your identity as a whole, like as just another part of your humanity, because I think that has like a really big impact, and just like to know your story and allow yourself to be curious. Because the more people who see that that's a part of who you are, they're going to realize that when they're attacking Israel as like an entire entity, they're attacking you as a person. And I think that it makes other people have a lot more perspective. Like a quick example of how those things are related. I'm very familiar with like my background and my heritage. I know my story. I know my people's story. I know where we came from because I was curious about it and I took the time to learn about it. So couple weeks ago, there's like some posts, someone posted my last name, Shufutinsky, which is very Russian Jewish name. And I know where it comes from. I know that it comes from like the Hebrew root shofet, it's a Semitic, Northwest Semitic language, Hebrew. And I had some people comment trying to claim that I can't be connected to Israel because look at this Russian name. I know my story, I know my history, what happened to the Jews who went to Russia and the Caucasus that have Hebrew names that come from a Northwest Semitic Canaanite language, the only one that's still alive to this day, and how they were forced to adapt Russian suffixes. So I can respond and tell that person, actually, this is my background, this is where my name comes from, this is my history, and that's part of the history of the Jewish people at large. And then after that, the response is just like some random like anti-Semitic trope, because there's no arguing with that. After someone gets to know you as a person and understand that that's part of humanity, they have two choices: either to respect you as a human, and then you can continue to have them in your life if you choose, or to disrespect you as a human, in which case they're usually a racist, and why would you want them in your life? So I'd say that that's sort of my message. Just be unapologetic and make sure that like you know your story, because that's empowering to yourself, and also like will help you grapple with those two groups of people that you'll interact with.
Can I just chime in one last thing? I would also say something that we should always uphold ourselves in the community is to keep ourselves accountable and not spreading misinformation from our side, because we have no need. They go low, we go high. Like, there's no reason for us to make up rumors about anyone or to spread misinformation. And that's part of what comes with learning and knowing and checking resources and reading more things. There's no reason to put out anything false or questionable, because we just don't need to. We know like Noah just said, we know the facts on the ground, we know our own stories, and so just something to hold ourselves accountable to is not putting out misinformation as well.
I think a safe way around that when you're first starting out too is just like speak from your own personal experience. Like, what have you felt on campus? What anti-Semitism have you experienced? I think by telling like personal stories like that, you're really like there's a lot of non-Jewish people who just don't even know that it's happening. You can't be wrong about your own experience.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for answering. So now we're gonna open it up for Q&A. And yeah.
Hi guys, my name is Sammy Herbert and I'm a Hasbara Fellow at Elon University in North Carolina. I have a question for Jordan. I know that being a vocal advocate for Israel isn't always easy, especially for someone who is a journalist, and the media has a tendency to be very anti-Israel. So has your activism created any challenges in your professional career? And have there been any outlets who won't work with you because of your activism?
So I am not a freelancer, and I've never been a freelancer. So I know that is a challenge for journalists who, like pitch to certain outlets and get rejected, or pitch certain, sort of stories that maybe paints Israel a little too positively for their liking. So then that outlet will reject them. That's more of like a freelance issue, I think, but on a more personal level, I do think that the industry, at least from working within the industry in New York, even with full-time jobs, these offices tend to be really sort of progressive. And so the space for talking about Israel, there really isn't a lot. And I've definitely felt the weight of that pressure before. And I mean, I've worked a lot of places since I've graduated college, but I've definitely felt that pressure and that weight here or there, even before I was equipped to even respond to it the right way. Like, I remember there were times where I would just hear things that didn't sit right with me, but I didn't know the right response. And I think it just freaked me out so much that I would just like freeze, and I'd be like, wait a minute, I work next to these people. Like, and I don't even know how to, I know that it feels bad, but I don't know how do I let them know that I've been to Israel and this is what Israel really is, you know what I mean? And they're wrong for X, Y, and Z reasons. And that was another thing that galvanized me to really start learning more. But yeah, now I'm very happy with, the work I'm doing and where I'm at. Maybe it made it easier that I'm working remotely and I don't have to necessarily be in that environment, but there's definitely been times in the past where it was a challenge, and I know that it is a challenge for a lot of Jewish journalists, definitely. Did I
Thank you.
answer that?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Yoshi Indek, and I'm a Hasbro High School intern in Toronto. My question is, are there any other ways but social media for young people to advocate for Jewish people and educate others about the misinformation we see about Israel?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in on this one. So yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think I'm not a big social media person. Like I'm a musician, I use social media to share my art. So like for me, the art is my way of interacting with people, and I think a majority of the actual interactions that most of us have, whether we rely heavily on social media in public or not, really like the meaningful interactions really do come from in-person experiences. So like I'll give like a flashback like a week ago about I was performing some songs for a group of students in Toronto. And that's really what I felt like was impactful was the fact that I could perform songs and then afterwards get a chance to talk to the students and have those one-on-one face-to-face interactions. So I think that social media definitely plays like a huge role, especially for disseminating information and helping people understand different perspectives. But a lot of times when the actual meaningful work comes from it is sitting down with another human being, looking face to face, and talking about it, analyzing whatever you saw, whether it's on social media or in the news or something that just you witnessed happen with your own eyes. So I think absolutely using whatever resources you can to learn about the topics, and then also taking a minute to sit down with another person and think it through, and actually have those like physical conversations where you're going to disagree with someone. And just using social media as like a resource even to start to learn new perspectives.
And if I can just add on to what Noah was saying, I think that part of being unapologetically Jewish in your everyday life is something that will help spark those conversations. You know, maybe you went to Shabbat dinner on Friday and you come to class and everyone says, "What did you do this weekend?" And you say, "Oh, I went to dinner with friends." Just say, "I went to Shabbat dinner at my friend's house." And someone might say, "Oh, Shabbat, that's a Jewish thing. Are you Jewish?" And that sparks a conversation, and someone's much more likely to be respectful or like genuinely interested if they're asking you in person versus behind a keyboard where they might feel more empowered, or they just share something that their favorite social justice activist posted and they don't even know what they're talking about, right? So whether it's that they know that that's Jewish and they're going to ask you, or they might say, "Oh, like Shabbat, what's that?" And then that gives you the opportunity to kind of tell them something. And like Noah said, then you can have a real in-person conversation with them, and that's probably going to be really fruitful for you. It could also go badly, so I understand the fear, but I think it's really important. Like Isabella said, like the poster says, wear it, talk about it, be you, like don't hide it.
I love that. I would also add, we all have so many talents, and we all have different talents and things that we're good at. And a way for us to advance our people is to use our talents in a creative way. Noah is an amazing artist. Behind Amy is Alex's was his art, like art. You don't have to use social media. I started being more active in social media with the pandemic. Before the pandemic, I used to work at the consulate, and I was more active in more professional spaces. But then I got more and more comfortable online because I saw we need to shift the tide and we need to shift culture. So whatever you're good at, whatever your talent is, and we all have a specific talent, use that talent to advance the Israel, whatever it is. If you're an artist, if you are a journalist, if you're at work and you want to create, maybe a relationship between Israel and the workspace. I saw somebody on my Instagram story. He works at a law firm, and the firm was sponsoring flags, and he said, "Yeah, can you what flag represents you the most?" He said Israeli flag, and the managing attorney is Lebanese. So there's so many creative ways that you could advance your people. It all depends on whatever you're good at, and use your talents to advance. That's what I would say.
Hi, so my name is Sarah Benshaya, and I'm a Hasbara Fellow for University of Ottawa. And my question is for anyone, not anyone specific. There's so much hatred and negativity on social media. What gives you the inspiration to go on and continue creating impactful content?
Well, I would say we come from a long line of strong and empowered Jews, and I say that it's a miracle that our language, our culture, our calendar, our belief system has, survived, and we are linking a chain. So what inspires me is the strength of my ancestors and all those before us who have preserved our ancient identity and culture, people who died originated from the land of Israel, and it is our responsibility. So that's what inspires me. I seek inspiration from the past. Specifically, also my grandmother was a very strong woman and who ingrained that within me. And Sarah, I know you're going to do amazing stuff too. I know you're from Montreal, and keep killing it, you too.
Thank you.
To add to that, I also think that especially like growing up in New York, I see how, you know, fellow Jews, friends we spoke about this before, internalized non-Jewish ideas about the Jewish people and about who they are. It's very easy when you're surrounded by that sort of culture where most people, you know, aren't Jewish, and there's not really an incentive to learn that much about the Jewish people and where we come from and our culture and our history. It's easy to slip into that sort of even believing like anti-Semitic things about ourselves. So it's very liberating to break free from that, to make sure that I think everybody on this panel would agree with me, to make sure that, you know, young people have examples of people who sort of like broke through that and feel that sort of like liberated Jewish identity, understand who they are, understand their history. I think it's really, really important for more people to speak out so that more people maybe don't have trouble finding those voices. Like how many of us have gotten DMs from people who are like, I'm so glad I found your page because I don't know what I would have done if I didn't. So I think the more people we can get to sort of like educate themselves, not fall into that trap of believing non-Jewish sort of ideas about our identity, the better off we will be in the long run.
Yes.
And to add on to that, I think it's about, you know, the empowerment is like a big word we use, but like, how do we empower ourselves? I will, you know, you've heard of affirmations and all these things, use them for yourself in the context of being a Jewish person. So I will not lie, and I'll admit this on camera, this is going to be on the internet. During the last escalation in Gaza, I did like Jewish affirmations. I looked myself in the mirror and I told myself like, you're a strong Jewish woman, and like the Jewish people are strong, and we've survived thousands of years of, you know, this kind of stuff and anti-Semitism. So that was really helpful because I definitely had anxiety attacks during that time when things were really bad. And I think that any kind of, you know, self-love practice that you do, bring your Jewishness into that. And from personal experience, I can vouch that it at least helped me. So something to think about.
Yeah, I think it's also where I get my like inspiration to continue is like recognizing that there's a lot of negativity online, and also going out of my way to try and find the positivity and incorporate that into my feed. So that way, you know, my you know, the reflection of Judaism that I see on my Instagram feed is going to include, you know, the people who are fighting against anti-Semitism. It's going to include the videos of the Bukharian community in Queens who was all posted up on 108th during the last escalation, making sure no one came to attack them in their communities and seeing that Jewish strength. It's also going to include pages like High Identity UK, who I follow, and she posts amazing content about Jewish communities, about the Iraqi Jewish community, Caucasian Jewish communities that I didn't know, and it's just learning about them. So it's very educational. And then it's also, you know, following like Israeli musicians. So I hear when the new slaps come out, you know, it's seeing the Israeli soccer teams come up and say the Shema before a game. And it's just showing how that Jewish life is integrated in all these different facets. So it definitely helps me see the positive aspects in addition to the negative aspects. And then also, like, I really think that, Amy, what you said was powerful as far as integrating like Judaism into the way you interact like on a daily basis. Like I'll say something personally that I do is like I don't post on Shabbat. So for me, I don't interact with people if I get comments that are negative. Like even knowing that I have the ability to take a certain element of like my Jewish practice and allow myself that time for reflection on social media, it's sort of like a reset. So I encourage everyone also to find some sorts of Jewish ritual practice that you can integrate into, you know, your modern life.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you to everyone who was here today. We really loved having this conversation with you, and we hope to see you again soon at some of our more events. Thanks.
Shalom to all the people from Hasbara Fellowships and Hasbara Canada. First of all, I would like to thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to show my voice to everyone. And second of all, thank you for representing all the Jewish community and stand with the state of Israel. I made a video especially for you. Enjoy. So I get a lot of messages of people that ask me, Uri, how you are not scared to roast all these dangerous anti-Semites and Bella Hadidush? And from 1 second I say to myself, yes, I get a lot of death thrills and people that tell me that my nose is big, and it's all true. But then I look at my Savta Sofia, who made Aliyah when she was a teenager and was literally walking without her parents alone from Syria to Israel, walking, yes, and I cry like a Jewish baby every time I need to climb Masada on Bertile with the Americans. And I say to myself, if my grandma that came here alone, all this distance, was fighting for this country, independence war, made Aliyah, yes, so why am I supposed to be scared? And beside that, the things that the anti-Semites want the most is to scare us, that we will hide our identities. Yes, that we will hide our Khamsa necklaces and, oh my God, look at his chest. Yes, and once they see that we have a strong identity and we are not scared to show our Khamsa necklaces, and I know that it's hard for me to say, I'm living in Israel, but once they see that we are proud and confident about our Judaism, that's what scares them more. Right, Savta? Nachon, Savta? This generation was fighting for this country, was doing everything. This generation only think about Instagram, TikTok, and Pornhub.
It is now my distinct honor and privilege to introduce this next session, The Emergence of Arab Zionism. Our panelists for this session include Noura Al-Hawadi, who you might remember as the girl from that viral photo of the UAE and Israeli flags overlooking the Dubai skyline. Noura is a true peace activist and has been one of the most vocal proponents for peace between Jews and Muslims, Israelis and Arabs, especially since the signing of the Abraham Accords. I highly encourage that you follow her on social media. Joining Noura will be Bassem Eid, a Palestinian peace activist who is a vocal advocate of how the Palestinian Authority and Hamas are violating the human rights of Palestinians, of their own people. As the founder of the Jerusalem-based Palestinian Human Rights Monitoring Group, Bassem has been tachlis about how Palestinian leaders are perpetuating this conflict and ensuring that nothing changes, rather than acknowledging Israel's right to exist and come to the negotiating table. He is a true ally of the Jewish community. Then we have Mohammed Kabia, an Israeli Bedouin who served in the IDF. Mohammed comes from a long line of Bedouins who have been very vocal about their support for Israel. Today, Mohammed continues to display his pride and love for the Jewish state by working as an IDF strategic consultant. He is balanced, objective, and a true activist for Israel, for peace, and for coexistence. Our student leader moderating this panel is John Jaden Ziner Cohen, a Hasbara Fellow at OCAD University in Toronto, who comes from a strong family of Israel advocates. John?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Daniel. So my name is John Jaden Ziner Cohen. I'm a Hasbara Fellow at OCAD University in Toronto, and I'm very proud and excited to moderate this panel, The Emergence of Arab Zionism. So it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce the following speakers. So we have Bassem Eid, who is a Palestinian human rights and peace activist, Mohammed Kabia, who is an Israeli Bedouin, IDF reservist and strategic consultant, and Noura Al-Hawadi, who's a UAE peace activist and advocate. And you may even recognize her as the woman from the photo of the UAE and Israeli flags in Dubai. So let's get into the questions. So for each of you, in your own words, can you each tell us a bit about who you are, your backgrounds, etc., your goals? Yeah. And maybe we'll start with Bassem and then move along if he wants to answer this question.
Yeah, thank you so much, John, and thanks for the Hasbara Fellowship for this invitation. أهلا وسهلا نورا، أهلا وسهلا محمد.
أهلا بك باسم.
Really, I am, as you mentioned, I am Bassem Eid. I am a Palestinian. I spent around, let's say, 30 years of my life defending the Palestinians' human rights. Firstly, I started it under the Israelis, joining an Israeli organization called B'Tselem, used to document the violations of human rights by the Israeli army against the Palestinians. And after the Oslo Agreement, I decided to resign from B'Tselem to create a Palestinian organization called the Palestinian Human Rights Monitoring Group to monitor and to document human rights violations committed by the Palestinian Authority against the Palestinian people. As you might know, to create a human rights organization under the Arab regime, it looks like to commit a suicide. 4 months after the foundation of the organization, I was arrested by Yasser Arafat in 1996, but I was so lucky that I kept in jail only for 25 hours. And the one who succeeded to release me in that time was the former US Secretary, Warren Christopher, under the Bill Clinton administration. Since that time, I think that arrest by Yasser Arafat already gave me a huge impunity. Since that time, I never ever heard any kind of threats. I never been in touch with the Palestinian Authority, and even the Palestinian Authority never ever been in touch with me. So since probably 6 years ago, I quit from the human rights work, and I decided to start lecturing about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but from a completely different perspective. And the perspective is that peace used to be between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And the conflict is between the Israelis and the Palestinians. So to come and to blame only Israel about the lack of peace, in my opinion, that's a very big wrong thing. I think that the Palestinians also should have to be blamed on the lack of peace. And I think that the Palestinian Authority has no strategy right now to make any kind of future peace with the Israelis. So that is the message, and it became so widely. And I am traveling, between 5 to 8 times a year to the campuses of the United States and lecturing about what is really going on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I would love to achieve, peace in my life with the Israelis, but unfortunately, it looks like that we are still far away to achieve any kind of future peace between our own people, Israelis and Palestinians.
Thank you for that answer, Bassem.
Thank you.
Moving on, Nora, do you have any words for?
My name is Noura Al-Awadi. I'm from the UAE, based in Dubai. I'm a peace advocate. I'm a peace activist. Being brought up here in the UAE, I've been around over 200 nationalities. In every corner you turn around, you see someone who's different, a person from a different background, different culture, different religion. To me, I want, I don't get into the political conflict. I'd rather have peace between the people. The governments need to deal with themselves, but being on social media and social media having a major impact, and the cyber world having a major impact, and being touched and being used by the future generation. I think what we are trying to do here, or what I'm trying to do here, is to educate people on Israelis and on the Jewish community. To me, I've never had any Jewish friends. I've never had any Israeli friends. since growing up, maybe because they were afraid and they never said that they were Jewish or they were Israeli or whatever it was. And post the Abrahamic Accords, things changed. I have this thing in mind. If you're afraid of something, you need to face it. And usually the human nature, like as a human nature, you're always afraid of the unknown. So why am I supposed to be blinded by something that is actually there? And me choosing to be blind and not wanting to see Israelis or to see the Jewish people. I mean, I've been, as I mentioned, I've been brought up with over 200 nationalities here. So why not? You know, the journey has been hard. It's been very difficult, but more and more people from the Arab world and from the Gulf region, especially the Gulf region, have been kind enough to keep an open mind into knowing Israelis and into accepting the Jewish people around the world.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nora. Mohammed, do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, first of all, hi to you all. Bassem, nice to meet you again.
Thank you, Mohammed.
In a panel for, to share the truth. Nora, Sharafna, the girl from the photo of the two women with the Israeli and the Emirati flag is, I think, is a wonderful photo. Okay, my name is Muhammad Kaabia. I'm a Bedouin from Israel, from the north of Israel. I grew up in a Bedouin village and for a Bedouin tribe that created a blood alliance with the Jewish people before the State of Israel established. Actually, in 1936, when my great-grandfather rescued Alexander Zaid, who was the Shomer movement leader in the Emek Yizra'el Valley, and he protected them and his family. And after that, my family was the first of the people that joined to the IDF, the first of the minorities that joined the IDF until nowadays. And this alliance cost my family 3 of their members that fall in the Israeli battles, and because that is for me is very unique connection to State of Israel and to the Israeli people, and this story and this connection what keep me every day to share the truth about about Israel and to try to bring a peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, because really I lost and my family sacrificed blood like many other Israelis in this conflict. How I said before, I grew up in my village, but I studied in my high school in Nazareth in a Christian school. And because the Christian school in Israel, I think also in the West Bank, there are the best education systems in Israel.
You're right.
Yeah, because that my parents prefer to send me to study there.
Yeah.
And but there always I had a conflict between me and between my colleagues to the school, because many of the Arabs in Nazareth, they don't or didn't define themselves as me as Israeli. They define themselves as a Palestinians, and they living under occupation. And this question, in which side I am on, it's always been with me. Like I thought about it all the time, but I've been sure about who I am is in the second Lebanon war, when Hezbollah, this organization, shooted missiles and rockets from Lebanon to Israel. And the Arab civilians that killed in this war there was more than the Jewish civilians that killed by Hezbollah rockets. And then I understood that the terror cannot separate between who is Muslim, between who is Arab, and between who is Jewish. And in this moment, I decided to be integral part of this conflict and to try to affect to better situation between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and to integrate Arabs from the Israeli society to the Israeli community. Because that when I had 18 years old, I joined to the IDF. I served in a special unit in the Israeli Air Force. And our job was, the mainly job that we had was to save lives. What's meaning that when we had emergency siren, we, staff of pilots and combats, we departed to anywhere to help people that needed the help. And many times these people was Palestinians inside the West Bank that had emergency situation, and Israeli helicopters landed inside the West Bank and take them to Israeli hospitals to give them a medical aid. And when the civil war in Syria started, we had tens or hundreds of situations that we gave Syrians people help and medical aid, and that injured in the civil war in Syria. And I remember it a few times that we took Palestinian childs from Gaza Strip that the hospitals there couldn't give them a medical aid, and we give them in the Israeli hospitals. And in my service in the army, I saw how much Israel want to help the Palestinians, and I watch how much the Palestinians, they want to be in peace with Israel, because the Palestinian people, I think they are a people that want to live under peace and in safety. But unfortunately, we have authority or organizations that using their suffering for their agenda, and I'm sure that Bassem will speak about it, and and he know about that better than me. And but I saw it, and after that, after my military service, and after I work in the Ministry of Defense, I began to share my story around the world. And many times me and Bassem, we been in the States together and spoke about it together and about the conflict. And I think that is the best thing, or the only truth that we can share. Like, if peoples came from the inside the conflict that they talking about, and from the words and from the towns, the Israeli and the Palestinian towns, and we tell the world that we are brothers, we are friends, we are doing everything together. And it's the truth and the reality is so different from that what the media, international media and other organizations trying every day to show you. And I think that is the most effectively thing that we can do. And in last years, I worked as advisor for the former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and the Public Security Minister Amir Ohana, advisor for the Arab world and the Arab security. And my job and my goal was to integrate more and more Arabs in the Israeli community, in the Israeli systems, and to share the truth about Israel and about the Palestinians. Because when the world will know the truth and the facts on the ground, I think that our situation and we will have a better life and a better situation, and we will have a peace not only with the Emirates and like Abraham Accords, I think that with the all Arab world. And I think that's it.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mohammed. So for our next question, have you faced criticism or vilification in regards to your approach and advocacy or advocating for Israel, peace, and mutual recognition? How have your communities reacted? So beginning with this question, could we start with Nora?
Well, yes, I faced a lot of criticism, not from my community, no, but on social media. The internet can be really vicious. But being on social media, you need to understand that anyone is going to see your posts and see your work, and they would do whatever they can to demotivate you, especially me being an Arab Muslim girl. People try to tear me down in different ways, but little do they know that I really don't care. I really don't care. It's a goal that I wanted to achieve, and I am achieving every single day of my life. And if people know me just only on Instagram, I think people should switch to Twitter, because I take things in a very, let's say, in a very funny way. So I would spread peace in a funny way. I would shine light on some political issues, but I would laugh about them, and I would try to make things a bit easier to grasp and for people to understand.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Nora. Moving on, Bassem, do you have an answer for that?
Yeah. I really appreciate Nora's activities here. As a Muslim, as an Arab, I can realize the difficulties and the obstacles that Nora is really passing during her activity, especially that the Israelis just very new to her and to her country. To compare with me, that I am living with the Israelis for 55 years. So I know each Israeli, and I know each Israeli where he is living in Israel. So I really appreciate your activity, Nura, and I can understand the Arab Muslim society, how they are looking to a lady like you, while you are calling for peace and for more understanding with the Jewish people. I want to say not 100% that everybody agreed with me, but in the meantime, I am very well person among the Palestinians, if it is in the Gaza Strip or it is in the West Bank. I should have to tell you that between the years 2000 and 2014, I used to appear on a live program, TV program, weekly on Channel 1, talking about the situation of the Palestinians and the Israelis. So everybody watched me in Gaza, everybody watched me in the West Bank, and I used to be very critical, let's say, to the Palestinian Authority, to the Hamas, and to the Palestinian people on the situation. I am a person who believes in one thing: stop blaming the others and start blaming yourself. After I will solve my problems, then I can switch and start talking about the others' problems. I think that we, the Palestinians, are living in a lot of conflicts. We have a big conflict among ourselves. Look to the divided society, the Palestinians. I think that they became divided more than ever. Look what's going on between Gaza and the West Bank. Look what's going on between the Hamas and the Fatah. That's really something which I don't believe. If the Palestinians will remain separated, I don't believe that they will be able to achieve any kind of peace with the Israelis. On the other side, I used to say that we are the Palestinians. We are a very good destroyers rather than we are a good builders. And here I want to take the Gaza Strip as an example. Since the Israelis withdrawal from Gaza in 2005, what we the Palestinians did inside Gaza in terms to improve the daily life of the people over there, we just did zero thing. I used to say that we the Palestinians almost destroyed in Gaza what remains from the Israelis. Look how the Hamas is acting these days. Look how the Hamas is using their own people as a human shield. In the last war in 2014, I wrote an article, and one important sentence, which was quoted internationally by all of the world, that I said that Israel is using its rockets to protect its people, while the Hamas is using his people to protect his rockets. That's a huge comparison between the Israelis and the Hamas during the war. I think that when I am standing up in a refugee camp, as an example, in the West Bank, and people start criticizing Israel very toughly, when we start talking and negotiating and trying to understand each other, I think that these people left me with a very, very, very little of criticism, because I am trying to explain to these people where we are the Palestinians right now on the map. If we will look to the Palestinians who are living in the Arab countries, I don't think that we can compare ourselves like them. I think that we are under the Israelis has a much better a level of daily life than any other Palestinian in any other Arab country. Listen, I visited a lot of Arab countries. I was in refugee camps in Lebanon. I was in refugee camps in Syria. I was in refugee camps in Jordan. No one of those camps is similar to any camp in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. I think that the camps of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank much more developed than any other camp in the Arab country. And that's giving a huge impression that Israel never ever imposed any limits on the Palestinians who are living in the camps, while the Arab countries imposes a lot of limits on the Palestinian refugees who are living in the camps. Listen, when you start looking outside, you start realizing the better life that you are living under. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bassem. So now this is for anybody. Whoever wants to answer this question can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. What would you say is something people misunderstand about you?
About us?
About you personally, yeah.
I'm biased to Israel.
Do you want to elaborate on that a bit more, Nora? Or?
Well, because since the Abrahamic Accords were signed in September 2020, I met a lot of Israeli youths, and then I had a friend of mine who was here in Dubai, and we did the famous photo of the Emirati flag and then the Israeli flag across from Burj Khalifa. And post that picture, I've had more and more Israeli friends come on board, and they visited the UAE. I had a friend of mine who visited my house and had lunch with my dad, and we took pictures, and we take videos and all of that. So people think that I am just pro-Israel. They think I am biased to Israel. They think that I don't care about the Palestinian people. They think that I have no empathy towards the Palestinian people. But little do they know that we have over I don't know, over 300,000 Palestinians living in the UAE. So I grew up with Palestinians. I grew up with Palestinians, Indians, Pakistanis, Iranians, but you name it, whatever you can think of. But I've never met Israelis in my life, not even Jewish people. I've never done that. So when something is new and fresh, you want to show people that it's okay. And then you want to show the new neighbors, you want to show them how things are done here. We coexist. We have a ministry of tolerance, and we coexist with anyone and everyone. And I don't know if you guys have been to Expo 2020 in Dubai. Just visit and see the amount of multicultural people around you. Just come in and see this. So to me, it's something new. It's like having a new car. You want to drive it every day. You want to take pictures of it. You want to, you want to polish it. You want to take it to the cleaners, the car wash. You just want to take care of it. You want to fall in love with the car. So in my mind, Israelis and Jewish people were something new, and not just Israelis who are Jewish. No, I have Christian Israeli friends. I have Arab Israeli friends. I have Muslim Israeli friends. I have Druze Israeli friends and Jewish Israeli friends. Okay, so people think, no, I'm just biased even to the Jewish people, but no, it's not how it's done here in the UAE. It's maybe they scroll through stuff and then they just see the post that has a lot of impressions, and it happens to be only about Israelis and Jewish people. It just happens to be that. And they just have a misconception about me that I'm just pro-Israel and I'm just pro-Jewish people, and I don't care about the Arabs. I don't care about the Palestinians, and being an apartheid person.
Yeah, interesting.
Awesome. Do you have an answer for this question, or?
See, yeah, this is one of the major problems here, that when you start talking about Israel, about peace, then people, start looking to you in a different way. As Noura mentioned, that you looks like a pro-Israeli, and in the minds of the people, that pro-Israeli means that you hate the Arabs and you hate the Palestinians, which is not true. I am a pro-Israeli, but I am also pro-Arab, pro-Palestinian. This is, if I want really to start building a bridge for the two sides to approach each other, I should have to be pro for this side and pro for this side. A pro-Israeli doesn't mean that you hate Arabs. A pro-Arabs shouldn't have to be hate the Israelis. This is what the people are trying to mix all the time. And that's one of the major obstacles, in my opinion, towards a future peace between the Arabs and the Israelis. Listen, you are living in a world which is divided to two different parts. Either you have the moderate people or you have the extremist people. And sometimes it's very difficult to bring those two parts together. Very difficult. It's reminding me by the Palestinian Authority as an example in the West Bank and the Hamas in the Gaza Strip. I can consider the Palestinian Authority as a moderate authority, but Hamas is a still very extremist organization. And to bring a moderate with an extremist together, that sometimes looks very impossible. And this is the Palestinian case, unfortunately. You know that the Hamas took over the Gaza Strip in 2007. Almost 15 years, the Hamas ruling Gaza, and no one succeed to bring any kind of unity right now between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, or between the Fatah and the Hamas. So I think that sometimes it's very difficult for us to act or to operate, but I think in the meantime, if we have a strong principle about peace between Israelis and Arabs, between Israelis and Palestinians, we should have to cross all of these obstacles and to try to reach the main aim of end goal, which is peace and security beside the state of Israel.
And now I want to take what Nora and Bassem talked about to a more complicated place. I heard many times how you can fight against your Muslim brothers in Gaza Strip or in the West Bank, and how you define yourself as Israeli and not a Palestinian. You are a traitor because you are an Arab Muslim and you should to be a Palestinian, and you're threatening every day your brother, the Palestinian brothers. First of all, yes, the Palestinians, they are my brothers. The Israeli also, they are my brothers, but the terror have no brothers.
Right.
And this is the truth. And I never fought against peoples because I hate who's front me. I fighting because I love who's behind me. And I never wanted to fight against people, but I want to fight against. I want to defend my people and my country and my home. And many times when I defend Israel, I will defend the Palestinian people, because I think that these two organizations, first of all, they're harming the Palestinian people. When we have a corrupt authority and a terror organization that controlling the Palestinian people, millions of people, I think that is the big chaos, and this people suffering first of all by their regimes and their governments, not by the Israelis, because what Israel gave the Palestinians over the years is many times more than that what the Palestinian leadership gave them. And I remember that the times that our unit, my unit, myself helped Palestinians inside the West Bank and inside Gaza Strip is more than what the sons of Mahmoud Abbas and Khalid Mash'al and others helped them, because I've been there. But their sons, they are in Europe and in Turkey and in the other countries. They have a grateful life from the donations that they stolen from their peoples. And I think that when people will live when you live with other peoples and you live with them every day, and you doing everything all the day with them, you will feel and you will know who is really your enemy and who is your friend. And I don't mean here that the Palestinians, they are our enemy. I think that the enemy of the Palestinians and the Israelis, there are the terror organizations and the corrupt authorities. And again, we never wanted to fight against people because we hate them, but we want to defend our people that behind us, that we love them, from this terror organizations.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mohammed. Moving onwards, this question is for Nora. Can you speak more about the role of Israeli-Emirati peace and how this can further benefit the entire region? How do you respond to people who are anti-normalization, anti-mutual recognition, and anti-mutual respect?
Okay. Well, I'm going to answer the anti-mutual respect first. The Gulf is known to respect people. It's part of our culture. Basim can vouch for me. We are very respectful of every person who steps foot on our land, whatever the race, whatever culture, whatever religion. We were taught by the founder of the UAE, our founding father, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan. We were taught that the land that we're living on is the land of God. And if there is so-called money, it's God's as well. And everybody is welcome to live here, work here, be a part of our community. Okay, so I don't think being disrespectful to other people just because they're different is okay. Period. I don't accept that. How is the normalization going to reshape the world? I think it's already happening. I think it's happening big time. The UAE started it off. We know that people are going to criticize us, but us as the people of the UAE, we have blind faith in our leaders. The UAE, compared to other countries, is a very small country, is a very young country, very young, 50 years, and we've done so much because our leaders have futuristic visions. So I don't think that our leaders taking that step is going to be the downfall of us and of the Gulf region. No. Because of the normalization, there are some Jewish people visiting Saudi Arabia right now. You've seen the rabbi. He's in Riyadh. Okay. So slowly but surely, people are going to accept it. Here in the UAE, I told you we live with over 200 nationalities, so we accept everyone. It's not a big deal over here. Like it's not new for us as the UAE people to see a new country coming over, or someone who is from a different culture or a different background coming over, visiting and settling here. It's normal to us. I always say the world needs to learn a thing or two from the UAE.
We
Just
have
learn
a
a
lot
thing
of
or two.
things to learn from you, from the UAE.
Then please, we keep our books open to everyone. We want people. We're actually really happy when people follow in our footsteps. This is when we know that we didn't fail our neighbors and we didn't fail our people. It's a good indication that within 50 years, mashallah, within 50 years, we've achieved all of this. Within 50 years, what kind of visionaries do we have as leaders? And our leaders know that we trust them and we have faith in them. In other countries, there is this so-called democracy, but rather than democracy, it is more hate than being democratic. We don't hate on our leaders. We don't hate on our laws. We know that everything is put in place for our benefit, to protect us, the people of the UAE nationals, and whoever is visiting. And whoever is deciding to move and to be a resident of the UAE. You go to any person who lives in the UAE, other than Emiratis, other than UAE nationals, you tell them, what does the UAE mean to you? they're immediately going to say it's home, it's safe. Every single person you would ask, they're going to say it is home and it is safe.
Yeah.
They are not UAE nationals, but they call this place home because our leaders made it home. So imagine you having more of Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, more of Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed, more of Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, more of Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed. This is why I keep saying I wish people would learn a thing or two from the UAE. We put things very, very firmly for people to follow, or let's say laws and procedures and policies and all of that. It's for the people. It's for the people. We want everybody to be safe. We want everybody to feel like this place is their home. You know, we want to protect our land, our people, the safety, you know, even us as women. I can go out right now. I can go out at 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, alone, just walking around. And I'd feel safe. You get me another country where a woman would actually feel safe doing that.
Especially the Arabs.
Especially Arabs. Especially Arabs.
Yeah. Okay, Daniel, I must have to leave you right now. I have a meeting within 20 minutes from now. I want to thank you, Daniel, to thank you, John, to thank Hasbara Fellowship in Canada. I want to thank Noura. I want to thank Muhammad. And I hope to see Muhammad and Noura in person very soon. Thanks to all, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Bassem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Be safe. Be safe.
Thank you.
Okay, so let us begin with Goldie. Do you have a question?
Hi, everyone. My name is Goldie, and I'm a Hasbara Fellow. I'm studying at Western University, which is in London, Ontario. And I have a question for Mohammed.
Yes.
Hi. As a Bedouin, what was it like serving in the IDF? And did you feel any different given that most of your fellow soldiers were Jewish?
Actually, I was the only Arab soldier between 6,000 soldiers in my base. And I never felt as a different, because my commanders and my friends always they worked and activate to feel one from us, and one like they never talked about with me about that I'm different or something like that. And the respect that I got from my commanders was, I think, wonderful. And they always care that was the caring that I will got all my needs. Like in Ramadan, they give me the all needs, like to rest, and I had a time for the lunch of Ramadan and the end of the day. And in my holidays, they gave me 3 days to be with my family. And no, I think that, and I've been a commander after a while in the army, and I was under me tens of soldiers, Jewish soldiers. And because that you will feel that you are part of this army, part of the IDF. And I mentioned before, I think the only army around the world that we have a mix of culture, that mix of peoples, that all of them calling each other my brother, Akhi. Akhui is I think is a, I can't explain the feels of it, but of this, but is I think that it's amazing. And no, never I felt as a different, and the army gave me all what I need to serve and to be a commander and officer and to success in my military service.
Wow, that really is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Elijah. I study at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Very happy to be here. My question is, realistically, how much can Israel do to alleviate tension, particularly among Palestinian youth, if there's still the issue over recognition of Israel? In other words, how much can Israel do that will actually matter in terms of peace?
Okay, I can give you many examples about that. Since 1936, the first partition plan, until nowadays, Israel many times offered to the Palestinians a peace agreement and a peace process, and many times the Israelis gave them more than 99% of the West Bank and half of the Jerusalem, and who's always refused this offers was the Palestinian side. And in Camp David and Oslo and in the first and the second partition plan, the Israelis gave them the Palestinians. They ask them what you need, what you want, and we will give you. And Ehud Olmert, I think, Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak, and especially Ehud Olmert, gave them half of Jerusalem and 99% of the West Bank, and just come and sign with us on a peace agreement. We want peace, but in the Palestinian time, in the last minute, they refused it. And you can check about Sharm el-Sheikh Accords or Camp David Accords or Oslo Accords. And you will, if you check what happened there, you will find that Yasser Arafat and Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, they are the people that refused this peace agreement in the last time, in the last minute. First, they said, yes, we want peace, we want to sign, but when in the real time, when they come to sign on this peace agreement, they refused, and they say that we can't to sign. And
Elijah, you can go on YouTube and search Bandar bin Sultan interview.
It's a great interview.
Watch the interview. It's a 3-part interview. He's a Saudi prince. He was, I think, a former foreign minister of Saudi Arabia to the States. I think
ambassador to Washington DC.
Yeah, ambassador. Sorry. Yes. Watch his interviews, and you would understand he was there in almost each and every process. He was there, and he would actually vouch for Muhammad and say, yes, they were the ones who backed down.
Yes, because the Saudi, they have an integral part of the all peace process between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And we have the Saudi offer that they're saying that the Israelis have to go back to the 67 borders, and this is the Saudi offer. And for truth, Ehud Olmert in 2009 or 8, he gave the Palestinians this offer. He gave them the all land that the Saudis talked about. But who has refused this was Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, the PLO president.
Yes, yes.
So is it okay if I just ask one more quick follow-up?
Go ahead.
So because there has yet to be a Palestinian government that recognizes Israel, how should Israel convey to the international community that they don't have, not only do they not have a negotiating partner, but that they have the way it's portrayed, I don't want to call it an adversary, but they have a potential peace partner who is still teaching, doesn't want their people to have make peace. So how does Israel show that to the international community and express why it's such a huge factor in this conflict?
I want to ask you something. If now Israel will sign on a peace agreement with the PLO, with Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, Hamas will approve that?
Oh, what's that? You said no, they would not.
They will not. And
No, they would never.
And if we now sign on a peace agreement with Hamas, the PLO will approve that?
No.
I think that the first step is that the Palestinians themselves, they have to sign a peace agreement with themselves, and after that they can come and we can condemn the Israelis why we don't make a peace with the Palestinians. The situations inside the Palestinian side is very complicated. They hating each other, they fighting against each other, and they hating anyone that they want to, who's tell them that they are is wrong, and they have to fix something inside themselves. Because that, I think that the Palestinians, before they saying that we don't have a partner in the Israeli side, they have to make a peace inside the Palestinian territories and between the PLO and Hamas.
I would agree with that. Thank you.
Perfect. So moving on, can we get a question from Sam?
Hi, everyone. I'm a Hasbara. My name is Sam, and I'm a Hasbara Fellow at Temple University in Philadelphia. My question is for both of you. What's something either of you think that we can do to help improve relationships throughout the region between Arabs and Israelis? Furthermore, how do you think we can unify the fight between Islamophobia and anti-Semitism?
Nora, it's for you.
Okay. How can you make the relationship stronger? Right, Sam. So in my mind, social media is your biggest ally and your biggest enemy right now. Okay. So what you need to do is also keep an open mind as a Jewish person, because the Arab world was blinded for years when it comes to Israelis and to Jewish people. And I don't blame them. Propaganda videos, fake news, all of that has been doing a top-notch job. Okay. I think at first you should show the world, your world, that you have Muslim friends from the Arab region, not in the States, not in Latin America, not in Europe, no, in the Gulf region, right? And I'm your friend. I'm right here. Mohammed, you're taking the spotlight, man. Just hold on for a second. Okay. You can as well show that you do accept Muslims in order to leave the whole tension between Jews and Muslims. You know, like this idea or this ideology only comes from extremists, right? Here in the UAE, we're moderate people. Okay. Again, we don't care. You're a human being, you have a soul, you're kind, you're more than welcome to be with us, right? I think you should well, number one, just a little tip, get you an English Quran. So I translated the book of the Quran. Okay. Get that and read it through, and you'd see that the words of God are all about peace, right? Extremists be it on both sides. Even Christians have extremists. It's not just us, right? Everybody has extremists, everyone. So you need to find a middle ground where you just want to be a human and you want to deal with humans, not with a Muslim, not with a Jewish person, not with a Christian person, right? If you go back to the 1600s, there were wars between Christians. They were Christians, but those were Protestants, those were Catholics. They were still Christians, but there were wars between them, right? So us being the newer generation, we don't want any conflict. You keep your religion to yourself, I keep it to myself. I'm gonna deal with you as a human being, and this is what matters. Humanity, we see a lot of human beings, very little humanity. We need to reverse that. We need to reverse that. So social media is your biggest ally, Sam. Social media.
Thank you, Nora.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Adalia, and I am a Hasbara Fellow at Ryerson University in Toronto, Ontario. And my question is for both of you, actually. Where do you guys see the Middle East in 5 years from now?
I wish and I hope and I pray every day to see the Middle East without Hezbollah, without the Houthis, without the Iranian regime, and without the terror organizations. And more countries is come and be a part from Abraham Accords. I wish to see these days.
I think within 5 years, a lot of countries are going to make peace with Israel. They're going to join the Abrahamic Accords because, again, it's a risk that the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco and Sudan took about a year and a half ago. It's a risk that they've taken already, and we haven't seen any harm. You know what I mean? So the risk is gone. The harm that people thought we were going to face is gone. So more people would have an open mind, and the best way to have an open mind is to visit the UAE every single time and just see it, right? And me going to the mall, I started hearing a lot of Hebrew, right? So it's so surreal, you know, like we have Jewish people all around, people who can officially say, hey, we're Jewish people living in the UAE, we're Israelis living in the UAE, we're visiting from Israel. It's something really nice, you know? So because the UAE has taken that risk and Israel has taken that risk too with the UAE, right? I feel like, yeah, down the line, 5 years down the line, probably, maybe, fingers crossed, everybody's going to make peace with Israel and would be more open to the Jewish people and to the Jewish community. Again, whatever you fear, you need to face it. This is what I hope to see. If you fear Muslims, sit down with us, talk to us. If you fear Christians, sit down, have a talk with them, right? But I used to not fear, but I was, you know, just ignorant about the Jewish people and about Israelis. I used to think, honestly, here's something my brain thought was actually a fact. I thought Israelis were only Jewish people. And surprise, surprise, no, they're Arabs, they're Christians, Druze, Muslims, you know? So you need to explore the unknown. You know, you have to explore it. I'm a big fan of Disney movies, a big fan of Disney movies. I'm 32 years old. I still watch kids movies. Okay. The problem is we just watch those movies just because they're movies or just because they're Disney. There's always a hidden message. I don't know if you guys have seen Moana, but her parents wouldn't let her go to the sea because they fear the sea. She wanted to explore. So she had to face that fear, and she went into the sea. And she managed to save her village. Okay, this is the exact same thing. Whatever you fear, test it. Take that risk. There's no harm. No one's gonna hurt you. Just test it. And I think the UAE has done that. And now it's just the rest of the Arab world need to follow in our footsteps. I mean, we've paved the way. It's time for them just to walk.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I would love to give a huge thank you, a big Tada Rabah, and a huge shukran to both Nora and Mohammed, as well as Basim. Thank you so much for being here with us today and for sharing your wisdom and for, coming together with us and forming sort of small squad. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Tada Rabah.
Hi, my name is Daniel Guerin, and I'm a Hasbara Fellow at Columbia. I was privileged enough to go to Israel on one of their programs this summer, and it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. The opportunities that I had on their trip were truly unique. I got to hear from analysts, religious leaders, and insiders, as well as ordinary people who live in the region. That's not to mention the incredible people I met and the friendships I made in those few weeks. It feels like every few days there is news involving pro-Israel groups on college campuses, and as someone involved with students supporting Israel at Columbia, I wanted to take this moment to congratulate the leaders of SSI on Duke's campus, which was coincidentally founded by Hasbara Fellows. A few months ago, they applied for official recognition from the student government. That was denied, the first instance in the history of Duke that the student government had ever denied such an application. This news spread across Jewish communities of the continent like wildfire, and this week, after months of fighting by both Duke students and Jewish communities across the country, the decision was reversed. It's these small victories that give us hope, that as pro-Israel student leaders, we can fight and win these battles. So I'd like to thank Duke's SSI chapter, applaud all Hasbara Fellows across the country, and thank you all for joining us here today. Going to Israel is an invaluable tool to help students do this type of advocacy on campus, and programs like Hasbara Fellowships enable brave student leaders, like those at Duke, to stand up and fight for what's right, for what they believe in. This further highlights the importance of the work we all do, and shows us that there are real concrete advancements that pro-Israel students are making out there every single day. Thanks again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this event.
My name is Alan Levine, Executive Director of Hasbara Fellowships. Thank you all for joining us here today. My first class in college was Introduction to Middle East Studies. I was a freshman at UC Santa Barbara back in 2005. And having come from a Jewish Zionist family and having spent time in Israel in high school, I was pretty excited about that first class. Until I arrived and had my rude awakening, when I realized that the professor was a supporter of the BDS movement. He was for boycotting Israel. And essentially he used his class to push his narrative, his belief that Israel was essentially at fault for everything in the Middle East. He called Israel a colonialist state. He used the apartheid label, of course. And he used every chance he got to tell his side of the story and his side of the story only. Now, as a freshman, and even though I'd spent time in Israel, I didn't know what to say or how to stand up. Until I went on Hasbara Fellowships in Israel. After becoming a Hasbara Fellow, I learned and I practiced how to talk about these things, how to communicate my narrative. And that's what Hasbara Fellowships has always been about taking students to Israel and empowering you. Learning while we're there, how to talk about the things we see, how to go to places like Sderot, spend time in a bomb shelter, and then talk about that back on campus. Talk about Israeli sides of the story, make our arguments, and stand up for ourselves. Now, history has run its course, and things have changed. And since I was in college 15 years ago, it's become very clear that what we used to think of as delegitimization of Israel is just good old-fashioned anti-Semitism. We used to call it standing up for Israel. I was president of the pro-Israel student club on my campus, and I'd say we have to stand up for Israel. It's become very clear that we should say standing up for ourselves. Because the delegitimization of Israel that we see, the movement to boycott Israel, isn't just about Israel. It's about us. It's about our Jewish communities on our campuses and in our cities. I think we knew that all along. We could always say that Israel Apartheid Week and the BDS movement on campuses were anti-Semitic. But today, unfortunately, there's so much evidence that helps us communicate that. From Jewish students being served eviction notices in their dorm rooms, to Zionist students being excluded from events on campus, to actual violence, with Colleyville, Texas being the latest example. It's clear that anti-Semitism has become a problem. And it's a problem around the world. We used to think it was dangerous to be a Jew living on Israel's border with Lebanon or in Sderot. It's become clear, unfortunately, that Jews are in danger anywhere in the world. And we have to communicate that. We have to call out the BDS movement for what it is: anti-Semitism. And we have to call it out while not distancing ourselves from Israel. We aren't saying, hey, stop attacking us over what Israel's doing. We're also saying that Israel is right and Israel is just. And the unfair singling out of Israel is absolutely uncalled for and should be challenged at every chance possible on our campuses and on social media. Because the singling out of Israel, the obsession with Israel, is not a foreign policy discussion. The Israel's critics, the Students for Justice in Palestine on campuses and others, they're not critiquing Israeli policy. They're not talking about Israel the way you might critique the policies of other countries at the UN. They're singling out Israel. They're saying Israel doesn't have a right to exist. Think about that for a second. There is one Jewish country in the world, and that's the one that has no right to exist. We have to call them out for what they are. And for that, I want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us for Israel Engage, to be part of this virtual summit, for taking the time to learn with us and with college students from around the US and Canada. It makes a big impact, it makes a big difference to have you here.
Wow. In all my years as a Jewish community professional, and especially over these past few years watching countless Zoom webinars, I have truly never been more excited for the future after watching a webinar. It's important to note that just some 5 years ago, you were not even allowed to say this word Israel in Dubai or in the UAE. You couldn't even mention it. Now, the Emiratis have introduced Holocaust education into their curriculum. Their leaders and official representatives have embraced peace and have embraced Israel in an unprecedented way. The Abraham Accords have shown us that peace is indeed possible. We just have to plant the seeds and change the narrative. Make no mistake, any group that opposes the Abraham Accords is anti-peace, even if they have peace in their name. And now it is my honor to introduce the Deputy Mayor of Yerushalayim, Fleur Hassan Nahum, for our session, The View from Jerusalem. Fleur is a balanced and extraordinary speaker in support of Israel and the Jewish people. She will join us in conversation with one of our brilliant Hasbara Canada Fellows, Taylor Levy, a student at York University in Toronto. The floor is yours, Taylor.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Daniel. I'm Taylor Levy. I am a Hasbara Fellow at York University, and I am so excited to be moderating this chat with Fleur Hassan Nahum today. She is the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem and is in charge of foreign relations, international economic development, and tourism. She is the co-founder of the UAE Israel Business Council, and she is of Moroccan descent and grew up in a British territory on the southern coast of Europe. She's also a law graduate from King's College London and has spent majority of her legal career campaigning for Jewish and Israeli rights. Fleur, it is an honor to be sitting here speaking with you today. So thank you so much on behalf of Hasbara Canada and Hasbara Fellowships.
Thank you, Taylor. It's great to be here.
Of course. We have a lot of ground to cover and a lot of burning questions on what's been on my mind recently, and I think a lot of other students, is Amnesty International, which is a human rights organization which came out with a 280-page report claiming that Israel is committing apartheid against Palestinians. Are you able to speak to why this is not true and the harms that this claim actually may cause to Israelis and Palestinians alike?
So first of all, it's great to be here. And I always love addressing students because you guys really are our ambassadors, not just of Israel, but of the Jewish people. And I really admire you going out there and making the case for Israel. And I wish you didn't have to, but the fact that you are there in the front lines makes me feel better in Israel. So first of all, thank you for that. So let's go straight to it. Amnesty International. Well, Amnesty International is inherently a biased organization that cherry picks which conflicts they decide to investigate and tries to forget about facts and law and just pin labels on in order to malign. Now, what's very interesting before we get into their accusations of apartheid is that yesterday I actually read a very comprehensive article which accuses them of built-in racism within the organization. There have been a few people of color who have come out, who were employed by Amnesty International, and they've come out saying that there's inherent bias in the organization, that the senior management is mainly white Europeans, and that there's constant name calling and intimidation of ethnic minorities within the organization. So it's very interesting that this organization that is inherently biased has also decided to take anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiments to another level. Now, let me explain to you why their accusations are false and dangerous. Apartheid is a very specific label that was put on South Africa for a very specific government policy of discrimination according to color, race. And the whole of the existence of the Afrikaans regime was about apartheid, okay? Now, Israel is a country that was created in a reality where to give Jews self-determination. It was a country that was born with several birth certificates that most countries are not born with. So we have UN resolutions, we have the Balfour Declaration, we have the Remo Declaration. I don't think any other country has as many birth certificates and permits to exist as Israel has. And Israel was never a country that was based on any type of racial apartheid, quite the contrary. From our very early days and our constitution, we protect the rights of minorities in our countries. We do not separate between Jews and Arabs in any right in our country. as citizens. Arabs are in every part of society, in the government, ministers, judges, doctors. In fact, the judge, one of the judges that put one of our prime ministers, Ehud Olmert, in jail, is an Arab judge. So the accusation that Israel is an apartheid state is libelous, dangerous, and completely false. Now, what the Amnesty report does is it doesn't make any differentiation between the different types of status of the different Arabs living in this region. So the Arab Israelis are full citizens in every way. I'm not saying that our society is perfect and there's no racism. There's racism everywhere, just like there's racism in America, and there's racism in Europe. I'm not going to say that there's no racism. Of course, there's discrimination and racism amongst many. There's also discrimination and racism amongst Ethiopians. It's unacceptable. Not amongst Ethiopians to be discriminatory, not amongst the Arabs. It's completely unacceptable. But the law of Israel protects minorities. Then you have the Palestinians who are not Israeli citizens, and they live under the responsibility of the Palestinian Authority. So they completely ignore the fact that Israel went through a peace process that gave birth to the Palestinian Authority, which was supposed to be the framework that slowly brings in a Palestinian state into being. And how was it going to bring a Palestinian state into being? By starting to take responsibility for their own people and taking care of their own citizens. And those citizens, they have to take care of them for health, they have to take care of them for employment, for social benefits. That's what the Palestinian Authority agreed and to do under the Oslo Accords. Now, are they saying that we are an apartheid state because those Palestinians don't have rights in our countries? What do they want? Self-determination or not? You can't on the one hand say, oh, we want self-determination, we want to create our own institutions so that we can bring in our own state, and on the other hand say, this is apartheid because they don't have rights in Israel. Well, what is it? You can't have your cake and eat it. If you don't want your own state, then say so now. You can't say you want your own state and expect Israel to take responsibility for those people. So that is a fallacy. And of course, the Arabs in East Jerusalem are a third type of status of Arabs, which are Arabs who are residents and not citizens. Now, they all have the right to become citizens of the state of Israel. And 10 to 15% have already exercised that right. And let me tell you what, more and more Arabs from East Jerusalem want to exercise that right. And there's so much demand to become citizens that we've had to open a second office for immigration in East Jerusalem to deal with the demand. Why is it that the Arab residents of East Jerusalem want to become Israeli? Ask yourselves, is it because Israelis are racist and apartheid state? No, it's because the Palestinian Authority are a bankrupt, a mafia-led government that only line their own pockets, that haven't had an election for 20 years, and they don't really care about their people. Because if they did, they would provide them with opportunity and they would build institutions of state like Israel did way before we were created as a state in 1948. So Amnesty International ignores all of these things and they just say, oh, you're Jews, you're here, so you must be apartheid. Not, and I think, in fact, it's an insult to the South African people and its cultural appropriation of a very specific time and a very specific suffering of the South African people in order to libel the state of Israel and the Jewish people. And underlying all of this is anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism is a mutating virus. And 500 years ago, people hated Jews because of their religion. We were Christ killers, and we didn't accept Christ, and so we were slaughtered because we were not the right religion. 150 years ago, we were sent to the gas chambers because we weren't the right race. We were not of superior race. We were not Aryan. We were somehow a contaminated race. And today, that mutating virus called anti-Semitism is now proving itself to be against the national home for the Jewish people. And that's how it portrays itself. But make no mistake about it, anti-Zionism means to be anti the rights of self-determination of the Jewish people, and that means the right of Jews to live in peace and harmony in our own country, and that is anti-Semitism. And so the Amnesty International report, in the end, it's a pile of anti-Semitic garbage with blood libels and with, in fact, on page 25, as my friend Arsen Ostrovsky pointed out, a libel of dismantling the state of Israel as a Jewish state.
That was a very informative answer that I'm very appreciative of, because it's such a long report that it's, I think, also distracting of what's actually in the report itself.
I'm sorry my answer was long, but I hope it was clear.
No, it was perfectly clear. It also, you know, it's very contradicting because they acknowledge, as you said, that there are Palestinian citizens of Israel, but then they blame Israel for committing apartheid because they aren't extending citizenship to Palestinians, and it feels
Look,
very much like a lose-lose.
Absolutely. One example was the vaccines. Okay, that was another libel. So with the COVID a year ago, the Palestinian Authority under the Oslo Accords have responsibility for health. Okay, they have responsibility for health and for their own people. So we were accused for not providing vaccines, which we don't have to because they had their own government. And on the other hand, when we extended our hand in friendship to give them vaccines, they said, no, we're not taking them. What is it? Do you want responsibility? Do you want to build a state? Or do you want to spend the rest of eternity pointing fingers at the Jewish people? What do you want? I don't think they know what they want. It was, and Amnesty International certainly don't know what they want.
No, and I mean, because of that, do you think there's any solution to this on either the Israeli or the Palestinian side? Is there a way that we can?
The only way is new leadership on the Palestinian side. I have a lot of friends, Palestinian leaders who are not corrupt and who love their people, and whose aim is not to pillage and plunder their own people, but his aim is to, bring about civil society, bring about self-governance, responsibility. And I think that that many non-profit organizations around the world who they believe maybe they have good intentions, but what they do is essentially infantilize the Palestinian people not to take responsibility for themselves. And so I believe that's actually very condescending and racist, ultimately, to infantilize the Palestinian people and say, oh, no, you can't take care of yourselves, so let's just blame the Jews. I think that's actual racism. And so we should hold them responsible. If you want responsibility, if you want to govern, if you want your own state, well, start governing, and stop robbing and pillaging from the world, from the different countries around the world that are giving you money in order to build the infrastructure for a state. They send the money for hospitals and they build tunnels. What is this? And at what point is the world going to hold the Palestinians accountable for their own misdoings and for their own illegal activities and for their own abandonment of their own people?
Right. And I mean, another aspect that's also been in the news and that is very controversial to talk about is Sheikh Jarrah. And, it's been all over social media, especially this past May. You couldn't scroll through Instagram without seeing something about it. And more recently, 2 homes there were demolished. Can you help clear up the air about this neighborhood? What was the reason for these evictions? And why are people trying to portray it as ethnic cleansing, but why are they wrong to call it such?
So basically, I want to make a separation between what happened last May and what happened a few weeks ago, because it's 2 very different situations. Unfortunately, they're both in the same neighborhood. So people just conflagrate them together and they say, oh, Sheikh Jarrah. They don't even know what they're talking about. So Sheikh Jarrah is a lovely neighborhood in East Jerusalem, very near the old city, that has got some very lovely houses. And let me just start from the beginning. East Jerusalem, as you know, was originally part of the before 1948, the whole of Jerusalem was supposed to be under Israeli rule in the partition. There's different interpretations of it, but ultimately, when all the different Arab countries around us in 1948 attacked us when we became a state, instead of accepting the two-state solution then that the UN had offered, they didn't accept it. They wanted the annihilation of Israel. They didn't accept any type of Israel. Israel said yes to the partition plan, one Palestinian state, one Israeli state, and the Palestinians said no, and all the Arab neighbors said no. So they launched a war against us. Now, in that war, unfortunately, we lost half of Jerusalem. We lost East Jerusalem. And the Jordanians were illegally occupying East Jerusalem between 1948 and 1967. Now, when that illegal occupation happened, at the time, that neighborhood was called Shimon HaTzadik. It was a Jewish neighborhood and an Arab neighborhood, and many Jewish families owned property there. They'd bought the property from the Ottomans, which was before the British Mandate. And so last May, what happened was, and this was very much an excuse for the war, not what caused the war. When you want a war, you find excuses. You don't start a war because of this or because of that. You're looking for an excuse, and there's always an excuse when you're looking for trouble. So basically, last May, what happened was there's a few families that for 40 years have been fighting in the courts the rightful Jewish owners of the properties in which they squatted for 70 years. So 1948, because of war, they came to East Jerusalem, and they were told by the Jordanian government, move in, it doesn't matter. And in 1967, when the city was reunified, they were still there. Nobody kicked them out. And then this Jewish Sephardi Trust, who owns the properties in the 1970s, started trying to reclaim those properties. And since the 70s and 80s, this has been in court. And for 40, 50 years, these families have known that they can't prove ownership of these houses. But because we are a society of law and order and mainly humanity, the courts gave these families a very elegant and very kind solution. They said, look, nobody's going to kick you out of your house, because what you essentially are in law are sitting tenants. Sitting tenants are tenants that have been there for different reasons for many, many years. And you can't just kick out sitting tenants. They have rights. And so the Israeli court said, you pay a very symbolic sum a year, a couple of $100 a year, and you can stay in this house and for the rest of your life. And at some point they accepted, which was a very, very, I think, kind compromise. And then, of course, the politicians get involved. The Palestinian leadership want to cause trouble, and they go and they brainwash these families, and they say, don't accept the compromise, keep fighting, when they know that they're going to lose because they can't prove ownership. They know that all along, but the court is giving them a way to stay. And so last May, they used this as an excuse to start this war, but these families were not thrown out then, and they haven't still been thrown out. They went back to court in October, November, December. They accepted it, then they denied it. You have to remember that this Al-Cord and his sister have become Instagram celebrities on the back of this eviction. That still hasn't happened. They're crying wolf to the entire world, and they're still living there. So I don't know why they're crying wolf. Eventually, if they don't accept the compromise, they will get kicked out. And that is because they don't recognize our sovereignty or authority, and that's really bad for them. That was the situation last May. A few weeks ago, it was a completely different situation, but again, unfortunately, happened in the same neighborhood. And so people think it's all the same thing, and people don't bother to find out the facts. They just malign you. And when people are so quick to malign the only democracy in the Middle East, the only place in the Middle East where Arabs can actually vote, when people are quick to do that, you've got to suspect them of being a little bit anti-Semitic, because otherwise, why not focus on the 500,000 dead Syrians, or the 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps, or the tragedies going on in Africa? Why focus on 5 people in East Jerusalem? And the reason why there's such an Israel obsession is because It's the oldest hatred of all time. It's going back to this mutating virus. But anyway, getting back to the situation a few weeks ago, this is a completely different story because these people don't even have sitting tenant rights. They moved in the 90s to an empty plot of land. They're like, hey, this looks good. We're just going to set up camp here. They built a house and a business on land which wasn't theirs. How do we know it wasn't theirs? It belonged to another Arab family. This Arab family, so the Al-Sakhiyas were living there, and the Al-Daiyas who owned the land, and the Al-Daiyas started kicking out the Al-Sakhiyas. And I'm assuming if they would have succeeded, we wouldn't have had all this bad publicity. But what happened was, in the meantime, the city zoned this area for the building of a school for special needs kids, Arab kids, because this area falls into brown zone. Brown zone is the zone of the city that is built for public use buildings, like community centers and like schools and kindergartens. And so the city in 2017 appropriated this land in order to build a school. Now, they are compensating the true owners of this land, the Al-Daiyas, for the land that we've taken for a school. So they're getting compensation. This family just moved in the 90s. And so they were basically squatting illegally. Now, imagine if I went in the middle of, a park in London and built a house. And the City of London, of course, as is their right, would kick me out of the house that I built in the middle of a public space. Now, do you think global ambassadors would show up and say this is an international, human rights violation? Of course not. This is the hypocrisy and the ignorance, and quite frankly, I think embarrassing on their part not to even scratch the surface and find out that this is a family that was squatting. They knew from 2017 they had to leave. We begged them to agree with us a mutual date where we could help them move out, where we could put them in touch with social services in the city, where we could help them reestablish themselves in a different home. But no, of course, everything in Jerusalem, from a brick in the wrong place, gets politicized and gets villainized and gets slandered. And that's the situation in which we're living in. But what happened 3 weeks ago was a simple building and planning violation, and squatters, illegal squatters being removed from land that was never theirs. And the family that actually owned that land, which is a Palestinian family, are being compensated by the city of Jerusalem for us to be able to build a special needs school for Arab children.
Well, thank you for clearing that up, because as you said, there's so much, and it obviously it has to happen in the same neighborhood, and then people are using different narratives on the same neighborhood despite not being the same problem. And you were also touching on how Jerusalem is, it's home to so many different religious and ethnic groups, not just Jews and Palestinians, but there's so many other groups of people that love that land. It's so precious to so many different peoples. I was wondering what the future of Jerusalem looks like to you.
Well, look, 2,500 years ago, King David decided to build the capital of the Jewish kingdom in Jerusalem. Now, King David was originally from Judea, from Hebron. So most people would have said, well, why didn't he make Hebron the capital of the Jewish people? And the reason why he picked Jerusalem was because Jerusalem didn't belong to any one tribe. Jerusalem was that space between Judah and Benjamin, and it was neutral ground. And he built his capital there because he wanted all tribes to feel at home. And so I believe it's very much in the DNA of Jerusalem to be a city of diverse groups, to be a city of different tribes. And we actually love that. We love this convergence of different nationalities and religions, backgrounds. We love the juxtapositions that exist in Jerusalem, East and West meeting, heaven and earth meeting. There's so much which is about merging things in Jerusalem. And so I see a future which is very much like our past, continuing to be a city of inclusion, a city where we believe diversity leads to better innovation, a city where everybody feels at home. And that is our plan in the way that we're planning the city, in the way that we're building the city, in the way that we're distributing resources more equally than ever, and in the way that we're developing the city economically as well.
Wonderful. You know, despite the diversity, a lot of people, especially in North America, are trying to portray Israel as not diverse and that Jews don't belong there. And for Jewish students, especially on college campuses, it often feels like we're very much alone. How can we continue to educate others about Israel, and especially about, boycott, divest, and sanctions movements here on campuses in the diaspora, of the true diversity of Israel, and especially Jerusalem?
So that's a good question. I think that you guys are in a tough spot, because when you go to college, you are being given a choice to either be pro-human rights or be pro-Israel. And what they do is very clever. They portray being pro-Israel as being somehow against human rights, and nothing could be further from the truth. First of all, if we wouldn't be here, there would be no freedom of worship for anybody that isn't the sovereign power. Here we are the sovereign power, and we create opportunities for freedom of worship, and we actively endorse freedom of worship. Now that wouldn't exist anywhere else. All anybody has to do is come to the Jerusalem walk around and wonder, what is this apartheid or racism or occupation that they're talking about? I have given birth 4 times, and I've always shared a room with an Arab lady from East Jerusalem giving birth at the same time. My park, my neighborhood is full of families that are both Jewish and Arab. My Zumba class has got ultra-Orthodox women, Arab women. We very much live a life together. Now, we don't live in similar neighborhoods, but I think that's more of a religious thing. It's not for any other reason. People like to live in their own communities. That's fine. I don't want to live in an ultra-Orthodox community, and ultra-Orthodox people don't want to live in my community for different reasons, for cultural reasons, for religious reasons. But ultimately, Jerusalem is a city of diversity, and whoever says it isn't is because they haven't been here. And so I think that what you have to ask people is, well, have you been there? And if they say no, then you have to kind of question them. Well, how are they so sure? And what type of propaganda are they listening to? And why are they so close-minded to only hear one side of the argument? And so I think the challenge is to get people to dig, below the surface a little bit. And once they do, I think it's pretty clear what slander and anti-Semitism is, and what the bias is, and what they completely ignore. And this is the double standard, is what goes on in the Palestinian Authority. From brainwashing of children, from throwing people from the LGBTQ plus community from rooftops, from making them feel that they're outlaws. People from the LGBTQ community, women, and the lack of rights, 12-year-old girls being married off to 32-year-old guys. I mean, everybody ignores this. They ignore it. They have this blind spot to any human rights violations going on here, only as it pertains to the Jews. Then they're worried about human rights. If they really cared about people here, then they would be pointing their fingers at Hamas, that are doing these horrible, horrible practices of institutionalized pedophilia with these girls, and brainwashing children into hatred, militarizing 2-year-olds, building tunnels to destroy, and not building people hospitals that they need, and not building people infrastructure and jobs, and what they're doing, and being accepting Iran's state sponsoring of terrorism. So, Hamas is a proxy of Iran, Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran, and these are our neighbors. And so they have a blind spot at all the obvious places, and they're so quick to judge, and they're so quick to condemn. And what they don't realize, that attitude of being quick to condemn Jews comes from a very deep place of anti-Semitism. And the Jewish students that fall into this, I believe, are either self-hating Jews, they don't know enough, or they really think that by allying ourselves with the enemy of the Jewish people, they're going to be cooler or more accepted. And in the end, what they will realize is that they will be hated too. And one day, maybe not now, but when they're in their 30s, they're 35, when they're 40, and their so-called friends turn themselves against them, they will realize that they were led up the wrong path for all those years, thinking they were fighting for human rights, but what they were doing is fighting against their own people.
Right. And, you know, despite all of that fighting, there is some work starting to be done now that, you know, is much more peaceful, and it's, you know, bridging these gaps between Jews and Arabs in the entirety of the Middle East. And hopefully soon it crosses over everywhere and there will be peace throughout the Middle East. But, you know, the Abraham Accords, unfortunately, have been dubbed a dangerous weapon by anti-Zionist Jewish groups. And they're, in reality, you know, a really important step towards peace. I was wondering, you know, what kind
Anybody who by definition is against peace needs their head examined.
Yes.
I don't know what they think they do. I really don't know how anybody could be against peace. How can you be against peace?
No,
it's ridiculous. The Emirati, look, I am very involved in the Abraham Accords. I have created two organizations, one before the Abraham Accords and one after the Abraham Accords. Before the Abraham Accords, I co-founded the UAE Israel Business Council. Today it has 5,000 business people from the Emirates and Israel. And we created the first online platform for businesses to do business together, which was, of course, during the COVID, which is when the Accords were signed. I also, after the Accords were signed, I created the Gulf Israel Women's Forum. I co-founded it with my friend, Justine Zwirling, and that's women leaders from the Middle East. I've got women from Saudi, women from Egypt, women from countries that are not even at peace with us, who are like, we can create a better society. This is fantastic. This is what the new Middle East can look like. And so whoever's against this is sick in the head or just downright, I mean, how can you be against peace? I want them to explain to me, how can they be against peace?
Yeah, it's very mind-boggling how people can be against peace, and it just, I think, shows how deep this hatred runs.
The beauty is, Taylor, that we just get on with it. We don't care what they say. The BDS campaign has had zero effect on the Israeli economy. Whoever goes against us ends up shooting themselves in the foot. Look what happened with Ben & Jerry's and Unilever. They've lost a lot of value on their stock, and it's going to keep plummeting, because you can't say, oh, you can't sell ice cream in East Jerusalem, in the old city, in the Arab quarter, but in the Jewish quarter, oh, in the Jewish quarter you can't, and 2 meters away from it you can. What is that? It's ridiculous. It just shows ignorance and hatred and just bad feeling. And so what you can feel happy about is that the BDS have only shot themselves in the foot. They've had zero effect. Israel last year had the biggest investment year in ever. We've had 8% growth in 2021. They're not scratching us even. And so, you know, they can continue thumping in the mouth, and we're going to continue building bridges, and we're going to continue making peace. And there's nobody happier than the Abraham Accords than the Arabs that I know in East Jerusalem, the Palestinians and the Arab Israelis. They are thrilled because, you know, every single flight I've been on, and I've been on quite a few flights to Dubai, half my flight is full of Palestinians or Israeli Arabs, and they're thrilled. And so the European colonialists can keep thumping at the mouth, and we're going to keep making our peace with our indigenous cousins here in the region.
Yes, and it's incredible. I think, you know, peace is difficult to attain, but when it does, it's so wonderful to see and to know that Jews can go to different places in the Middle East, and a lot of
and also it's changed the paradigm. You know, what's happened is, and this is why these people are so angry, there's no longer an Arab-Israeli conflict. It's gone. What exists now is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What exists now is an Iran threatening the entire region and the world. There's no Arab-Israeli conflict anymore. And that really annoys people that want the annihilation of Israel, because, you know, be sure to understand that the people who don't want peace don't want Israel to exist in this region either.
Right. Well, I have one final question for you, and it's a bit more personal and happier, I would think, because you were not just a Jewish and Zionist icon, but also a feminist icon that I looked up to, and I know so many other women and Jews and Israelis and everyone looks up to. Has being a woman in Israeli politics been challenging? And do you think your experience would have been different if you were in a different country?
Well, first of all, thank you for the lovely compliment. I'm not quite sure how much of an icon I am, but if I am to you and your generation something or some type of a role model, then I'm happy. Look, I don't know. I wasn't a politician in another country, and I'm not a man in this country. But what I can tell you is that being a woman in politics is hard for one main reason, because you're always, whatever you are, whatever you do, you always are underestimated. Women are underestimated in general. Women are especially underestimated in politics. In other words, at the beginning, nobody takes you seriously. It's like winking, okay, girl, you can try, that type of thing. But I like to see every silver lining on a cloud. And I think we have to use the disadvantage as an advantage. And the main advantage to being underestimated is that they don't see you coming. So you have the power of surprise. I love nothing more in the world than proving people wrong. I love nothing more in the world than leaving a trail of people who underestimated me because I'm a woman, and showing them that we can do things in a different way, I think a better way in many, many cases, especially peace building and bridge building. This is a particular strength of women. Women have a way of creating very strong bonds very quickly, because we speak we speak our own language in a way. We speak to other women on a more emotional level, in a more open, we share more, we talk more. And that's why I created the Gulf Israel Women's Forum, because I believe that if we want a sustainable, long-lasting, warm peace in the Middle East, which is the peace that we need, that's only going to happen through women. And that's why I created the Gulf Israel Women's Forum, and it's proven to be incredible. And the fact that I have Saudi women in the forum when we don't even have peace with Saudi Arabia just shows you that women are ahead of the game in terms of bridge building, in terms of putting our pride and egos aside. We do that better than anybody. We do that better than men. And so I'm very proud to be one of those people who are pushing forward peace building and bridge building initiative as a woman, because I'm a woman with other women.
It's truly incredible to watch. You're not just breaking barriers in Israeli politics, but also for women worldwide, and especially in the Middle East. And to watch that is incredibly inspiring as a young woman.
Thank you, dear.
So thank you so much, Fleur. This has been truly an honor. We have a few questions from some students. I think, Sharon, if you'd like to unmute yourself, go first.
Yes. Hello. First of all, Fleur, thank you so much for speaking today. Really, really inspiring. For me, as someone who supports Israel as well as other women, I appreciate it. My name is Sharon, and I'm a student volunteer with Hasbara Fellowships Canada, and I'm also a recent graduate from the University of Toronto. And my question is that most student clubs, that claim to be pro-Palestinian, they spend all their time demonizing Israel and very little time actually supporting Palestinians. And, they support BDS, even though it harms Palestinians and Israeli Arabs. What's the best way to educate other students about this reality?
So that's a good question. And it's a difficult thing, because they come in with such kind of hatred, and, the aim is to delegitimize. So what I try and do is I try and challenge them and start with something like this. I believe in the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. Do you believe in the Jewish right to self-determination? Now, if they say no, then you say, well, that makes you an anti-Semite and the conversation is over. If they say yes, then you have an opening to try and discuss what Palestinian self-determination should look like and why the Palestinian leadership should be taking responsibility for their own people, and if they should be, pushing or advocating with anybody for equal rights, it's the Palestinian Authority to treat its own people better and to provide the resources that they deserve, and certainly to actually trickle down all the help that they're getting from the whole world. So that's one way of approaching it. And the other way is thinking, tell us, what does a state for you look like? Because, after all these years, and the Palestinians still don't have an idea of what they want their state to look like. Is it a religious state? Is it an Islamic state? Is it a secular state? What type of government institutions are you going to have in your state? Where does civil society play a role? They have no clue, because their entire identity of the so-called pro-Palestinian camp around the world is not pro-Palestinian, is anti-Israeli. So what you can challenge them and say, how are you exercising your pro-Palestinian stance to advance the Palestinian people? Let's say Israel didn't exist and you wanted to create a Palestinian state. What would it look like? They have no idea, because that's really not their focus at all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon. Emma, if you'd like to unmute yourself and turn on your camera.
Yeah, hi, Fleur. Thank you so much. That was a very powerful conversation, and I'm definitely super inspired by everything you've said. My name's Emma, and I'm a Hasbara Fellow at Queen's University. And I had a question. We briefly spoke about this, but last May during the Israel and Hamas conflict, there was so much misinformation being shared about Sheikh Jarrah, and even though individuals like yourself are working hard to offer the truth, why do you think there's still so much misinformation being spread, and why are social media influencers and the media so ready to accept all these falsehoods and lies about Israel?
I think it's a combination of ignorance and anti-Semitism. The influencers who jump onto these campaigns, they don't know anything. They don't know anything. It's a trendy hashtag. Why isn't anybody trending, free Ukraine at the moment, when Russia is about to launch a world war in the footsteps of a sovereign country? Why does that not happen? The reason is because it's not trendy, because hating Jews has been trendy for hundreds of years. And the reason why hating Jews has been trendy for hundreds of years is, I think, two reasons. One is because people believe that when you punch up, it's not really discrimination. And I think that people look around and see the Jews are successful. Of course, the reason Jews are successful is because we've worked very hard to be successful, because we're ambitious people, because we contribute, because we work like dogs to be accepted and to do better than everybody else. Nobody gave us anything. So we built it ourselves. And so people look at that, and there's a certain element of, well, we can't be anti-Semitic, look how well they're doing. So that's that. And the second thing is that I believe that a lot of the people, especially Europeans, who kind of feel slightly guilty or very guilty for the Holocaust, and how in a civilized continent like Europe, they could have killed 6 million Jews indiscriminately, this kind of washes their conscience a little bit. Oh, well, the Jews are just as bad as the Nazis. Of course, that's ridiculous. We don't kill anybody that doesn't try and kill us first. And so I think it's a combination of anti-Semitism, ignorance, and let's just wash our guilty conscience of the fact that the only genocide that's happened in the civilized world was done against the Jews.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Next, Gabrielle, if you'd like to unmute yourself and turn on your camera.
Hi, Fleur. Thank you so much for that. It was really informative. My name is Gabrielle Weiss. I am a Hasbara Fellowship Social Media Manager, and I'm an alumni of Pace University in New York City. And my question for you today is, there are groups such as Jewish Voice for Peace that are against the Abraham Accords and peace between Israel and other Arab nations, unfortunately. Is it worth students' efforts to try to educate them about why they're wrong for having this approach?
I think that you don't have to educate them why they're wrong. Just share the great stories. and you'll just prove them wrong. You don't have to explain to them why they're wrong. Just prove them wrong. And so every time you see a nice story about a wonderful project that's been done between Israel and the UAE, Israel and Bahrain, people to people, you know, what makes this piece different and wonderful is that it's very much people to people led rather than, you know, leadership led, which was the case with Jordan and Egypt. But even with Jordan and Egypt, they've got like FOMO now, and they've like doubled and tripled their trade with us in the last, since the Abraham Accords. It's incredible. And so I think, look, let me tell you a wonderful story. I do a lot of work in East Jerusalem with the Arabs of East Jerusalem to try and bring them opportunities and try and equal the playing field in terms of startup nation stuff and bring big high-tech companies. You know, I work for all my constituents, Jews and Arabs alike. Anyway, so one day I'm in this meeting and I come out of this meeting and this Palestinian guy comes up to me, Mahmoud, and he says to me, Flo, I had to tell you a story. I said, what? He said, well, I was in one of your webinars that you did for the UAE Israel Business Council, and I met an Emirati and I met a Moroccan and an Israeli, and we've now opened a company together called the Jerusalem Saffron Company, which is, you know, making saffron, which is like a very rare and expensive spice, in Jerusalem with Emirati money and Israeli technology and Moroccan seeds. And that happened from your webinar. And so this is amazing. These are the stories that I love to share. In East Jerusalem, for example, we have two amazing organizations. One is called Tech to Peace, and one is called 50/50. Both organizations aim to bring Palestinians and Israelis together to create startups together. And many of those startups are social startups to help people. And so what I would do is, instead of, you know, putting yourself on the defense, just share the stories and go on offense. Don't bother. They're honestly windbags shouting at walls, because they have zero effect on the peace building and bridge building that we're doing. You're going to waste your time and energy. So just share the joy. That'll make them even more angry.
Thank you so much.
Amazing. And we have one last question from Max. So Max, if you would like to unmute yourself and turn on your camera.
Hey, Flor, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Hi, Max.
My name is Max, and I'm a graduate from Binghamton University. So something that we see a lot on college campuses and online is that there's a lot of negativity in this narrative surrounding Jerusalem about sort of like who it belongs to, quote unquote. Obviously, we know Jerusalem is like an incredible, diverse melting pot with Jews and Druze and Muslims and Christians. Wanted to know if we could hear from you the positive experiences working and serving as deputy mayor in Jerusalem from more of a local perspective.
So look, the stories are so, there's so many stories. And Jerusalem, look, we have to also look ourselves in the mirror. For many years, Israel didn't really know what they were going to do with East Jerusalem. During the Oslo Accords, you know, that the kind of the conventional wisdom was that half of it, the Arab part would be a Palestinian capital, it would be split. But I think after the failure of the Oslo Accords, failure which is only attributed to the Palestinian leadership, because Israel was ready to make peace and they were the ones who rejected it again and again and again, is that there's been kind of in East Jerusalem a change in the attitude of the Arab residents, and they've realized that the cities actually got their arms wide open in order to be able to build and help with economic development, etc. And so we have incredible stories of bridge building. We have organizations that we've created to help small and medium-sized business, to give women, you know, I think if we've learned something from the underdeveloped countries or developing countries, is that when you give a woman a loan, she comes back with a business that supports her family. And so we've taken those models and we're empowering Arab women in East Jerusalem with many of our programs. There's more and more Arabs in high tech in the city than ever before. There's more Arab young men and women in our colleges and universities than ever before. There's more Hebrew being taught in East Jerusalem than ever before, because the Palestinian Authority schools there are very, very adamant not to teach Hebrew, to keep people ignorant and poor with less opportunities. And so I think it's a combination of Israel outstretching its hand in the last 6 years with real resources to try and create infrastructural development, to try and create economic development and educational development. It's a combination of that and the Arab population in East Jerusalem saying, hang on, you know, we have health, we have education, we have everything coming from the city of Jerusalem and the government of Israel. You know, I think we're gonna take this, because the other side are not going to be our salvation here. They're not going to offer us anything. And so this gives me incredible hope. And like I say, my daily work sees me in East Jerusalem, talking to Arab partners, Palestinian partners, Arab Israelis, Druze, people that we're friends, we're building the city together. And so, because I know that that's a reality, it's easy for me to tune out the negative voices that are telling us what they think that we're doing, but it's not actually what we are doing. And so you just have to look at the stories that are coming out of Jerusalem. Our mayor, Moshe Leon, you know, there's never been a mayor more dedicated to closing gaps, social gaps in East Jerusalem than him. The leaders, the Arab leaders of the different neighborhoods meet with him every month. Whatever they ask for, he's willing and he's able. And they say they've never had such a good mayor. So I think it's us coming forward, opening our arms, and it's them coming in and saying, yeah, we want to do this together. And so that gives me a lot of hope, and that should give all of you a lot of hope. And I think that this is why the radicals get angry when they see normalization, where it be on a regional level with the Abraham Accords, on a national level with an Arab party finally being in the government of the state of Israel, or on a local level, all the bridges being built between East and West Jerusalem. The radicals don't like that. The haters don't like that. The haters can keep hating, and we're going to keep building.
Thank you so much.
Amazing. That was the perfect uplifting note to end off with. So I just want to thank everyone who's in attendance for coming and listening to the incredible Fleur. Thank you so much again, Fleur, for speaking with us today. It has truly been an honor to sit here and talk with you about Israel and life and Judaism and hopefully peace in the Middle East. And I just want to extend, you know, my gratitude once again for all of the work that you're doing, because it's so truly important and inspiring. And I really hope one day soon we can see peace between all Israelis and Palestinians in Israel and in the diaspora. And with the helps of you, I really do think that that is a possibility. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Taylor, and thank you to Hasbara Fellowships. And I really hope that you all get to come to visit me in Jerusalem very, very soon.
I will be on the first flight.
Wonderful.
I'm gonna pass it back to the executive director of Hasbara Canada, Daniel. Thank you again, Daniel, for this opportunity.
That was truly brilliant. Fleur, I am floored every time I hear you speak. Taylor, you have a bright future ahead of you, and our community should be so lucky to have you as an activist and as an advocate for the Jewish people. Thank you again to all of you for joining us today for Israel Engage Winter 2022. I will remind you, none of our work is possible without your support. Please consider making a donation at www.israelengage.org. Thank you, and Shavua Tov.
למה את עושה לי דמעות? לא חושבת עליי, תמיד עושה לי מנגינות, ומה יהיה עלינו? את הורסת באתי לבנות, את לא שואלת מתי, ואת יפה לי בלילות, ומי יפריד בינינו ככה? את אומרת לי פשוט, תתחיל לנגן, בקצב תיתן, ומה שיהיה פה יהיה. למה את גונבת צמיחות? נהיה לי מדי, תשאלי בחלומות מה יהיה עלינו, גם בעצב גם בשמחות, את לא עוזבת את היד, נכון עשינו טעויות, ומי יכול עלינו ככה, את אומרת לי פשוט, תתחיל לנגן, בקצב תיתן, ומה שיהיה פה יהיה.